The windshield wipers screamed against the glass like a wounded animal, and I told myself for the 19th time that I could still turn around. I could still turn the Honda back toward my apartment, toward the radiator that clanked, but worked toward the leftover Thai food waiting in my fridge, toward a Christmas Eve spent alone, but peaceful. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as the defroster fought a losing battle against the frost creeping up from the corners. The heater had given out somewhere around Worcester, and now my breath came out in small white clouds that disappeared against the windshield before the wipers could catch them. In the passenger seat, a bottle of wine sat wrapped in tissue paper and ribbon. $40, 2 hours of tutoring money. I had spent 20 minutes in the liquor store asking the clerk which red would pair well with prime rib, because that was what Linda always served on Christmas Eve, and I had learned a long time ago that bringing the wrong wine was worse than bringing no wine at all. I glanced at the GPS. 17 minutes to the Davis estate. 17 minutes until the iron gates would swing open and swallow me whole for another holiday performance. Just 2 hours, I whispered to myself, the words fogging the air in front of my lips. Eat dinner, smile, leave. You have done this before. You can do it again. The storm had turned Route 9 into a white tunnel, the kind of darkness that pressed against the windows like something alive. My headlights barely cut through the swirling snow, illuminating nothing but more snow, more darkness, more of the same emptiness I had been driving through for the past hour. Other cars had long since pulled off the road or found shelter. Only idiots and people with somewhere they absolutely had to be were still out here. I fell into the second category, though some nights I wondered if I belonged in the first. The GPS chirped. Turn right in 500 feet. I slowed the Honda to a crawl, searching for the turn through the white curtain. There. The stone pillars appeared like ghosts, carved lions perched on top with snow piled on their manes. The iron gates stood open, waiting. They were always waiting. I turned onto the private drive, and the world transformed. The Davis estate sprawled across 12 acres of what had once been farmland, back when this part of New England still had working farms instead of investment properties. The main house rose 3 stories high, all red brick and white columns lit up like a department store display. Every window glowed. Every hedge had been trimmed into geometric perfection. Even the snow seemed to fall more elegantly here, drifting down in postcard-worthy flakes, rather than the angry sleet that had been pelting my windshield for the past hour. I pulled into the circular driveway and felt my stomach drop. Bentleys. 3 of them, all black, all gleaming despite the weather. A silver Porsche Cayenne that I recognized as Tiffany's. A red Tesla that had to be Brittany's latest toy. A Mercedes SUV with diplomatic plates that I did not recognize but that probably belonged to one of Robert's business partners. And there, parked directly in front of the main entrance like a throne, was Robert's Rolls-Royce, the one he had bought last spring to celebrate some merger or acquisition or hostile takeover. I parked my Honda at the far end of the drive near the service entrance. The car looked like a coffee stain on a white tablecloth rusted around the wheel wells, the back bumper held on with zip ties since the fender bender last March. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the howl of wind outside. My phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "Where are you?" "Dinner starts at 7 sharp. No question mark, no greeting. Just a command like I was a subordinate who had missed a deadline. I checked the time. 6:43. I was early technically, but in Robert's world, early meant late, and on time meant you had already failed. I grabbed the wine, pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. I ducked my head against the wind and made my way toward the house, my boots crunching through snow that had already accumulated 4 inches on the driveway. The Pemberton family crest gleamed above the main entrance, carved into the stone lintel. Robert had added that, after the wedding, along with Linda's hyphenated last name, as if he could buy his way into old money by stamping their symbols onto his walls. I reached for the front door, but it swung open before I could touch it. Linda stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the foyer, wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant twist, and diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat. She looked like she had stepped out of a holiday catalog, the kind that sold $500 ornaments and cashmere throw blankets. "Oh," she said, her gaze sliding over me like I was furniture. You made it. I thought perhaps you had gotten lost. The subtext was clear. She had hoped I would get lost. She had hoped the storm would keep me away, would give her the perfect Christmas she had been planning for months. The one that included her daughters and her husband and her important guests, but did not include the awkward reminder of Robert's first marriage. Merry Christmas. Linda. I held out the bottle of wine like a peace offering. I hope this pairs well with dinner. She took the bottle without looking at it, her fingers barely grazing mine as if poverty might be contagious. How thoughtful. I will have Maria put it with the others. The others. Of course. My $40 bottle would end up on a table with vintages that cost more than my monthly rent, and no one would ever open it. It would sit there collecting dust until some housekeeper threw it away, wondering why anyone had bothered to bring such cheap wine to a Davis Christmas. I stepped inside and the warmth enveloped me like a lie. The foyer alone was larger than my entire apartment. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers and a Christmas tree that had to be at least 15 feet tall. The decorations were color-coordinated in silver and gold, not a single red ornament in sight, because Linda had decided years ago that red was tacky. Professional decorators had spent 3 days turning the house into a winter wonderland, and the result was beautiful in the way that museum exhibits were beautiful, impressive but untouchable. Robert is in the study, Linda said, already turning away. He is entertaining some important guests before dinner. Try not to interrupt. She disappeared down the hallway, her heels clicking against the marble, leaving me alone in the foyer with the 15-foot tree and the sense that I had already made a mistake by coming. I hung my coat in the closet, taking care to push it to the back where no one would see the frayed cuffs and the missing button. The mirror on the closet door showed me what I already knew. My dress was 3 years old, bought on clearance at a department store that had since gone out of business. My hair was frizzy from the snow. My makeup, what little I wore, had smudged under my eyes from the cold. I looked like exactly what I was, the daughter who did not belong. I followed the sound of voices toward the study, steeling myself for what I knew was coming. The study was Robert's domain, the place where he held court and conducted business, and reminded everyone of how far he had risen from his humble beginnings. The walls were lined with books he had never read, and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities and business leaders. A fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace, and the air smelled of cigars and expensive whiskey. Robert stood at the center of the room holding a tumbler of amber liquid surrounded by 3 men in suits who hung on his every word. My father was 60 years old but looked 50 thanks to personal trainers and expensive surgeries and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His silver hair was swept back from his forehead, and his custom-tailored suit probably cost more than my car. And I told them Robert was saying, if you want to play in my sandbox, you follow my rules. That is the problem with these tech startups. They think disruption means you can ignore the fundamentals. But business is business, gentlemen. The cream always rises to the top. The men laughed the way men always laughed at Robert's pronouncements, whether they were funny or not. Robert basked in their approval, swirling his whiskey, already launching into another anecdote about his business acumen. I hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to enter or retreat. Robert had not seen me yet, or if he had, he was choosing to ignore me. Both options felt equally likely. "Dad," I said during a brief pause in his monologue, "Merry Christmas." Robert turned, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Not warmth exactly. More like recognition, the way you might recognize a piece of furniture you had forgotten you owned. "Maya," he said, "you are here." I crossed the room to hug him the way I always did, the way daughters were supposed to hug their fathers on Christmas. His body stiffened under my arms, tolerating the embrace the way he might tolerate a handshake from a stranger. He did not hug me back. I stepped away, swallowing the familiar sting of rejection. "I brought wine," I said. Linda took it. Robert's eyes dropped to my dress, my shoes, the clearance rack pearl studs in my ears. Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around his mouth that I had learned to recognize over 32 years of being his daughter. "I see," he said. Then to the men behind him, "Gentlemen, this is my daughter Maya. She teaches children how to read." The way he said it made it sound like a disease. Like I had chosen to spend my life in service of something embarrassing, something beneath the Davis name. Never mind that I had a master's degree. Never mind that my students had improved their test scores by double digits. Never mind that I had worked my way through college without a cent of his money. In Robert's world, the only measure of success was money, and by that measure I was a failure. "Nice to meet you," one of the men said, barely glancing at me. "Your father was just telling us about the Hartwell acquisition." Robert lit up at the mention. "Ah, yes. That is going to be the crown jewel of the portfolio. Once we finish the merger, Davis Holdings will be the largest commercial real estate firm in New England." I stood there as he continued, invisible, unnecessary, a ghost at my own family's Christmas party. After a few minutes, I mumbled an excuse about finding Tiffany and slipped out of the study. No one noticed me leave. The dining room was already set for dinner, a table that could seat 20 laid with china and crystal and silver that had been in Linda's family for generations. Fresh flowers cascaded from centerpieces and candles flickered in elaborate holders. The effect was stunning and cold, like everything else in this house. I found Tiffany and Brittany in the sitting room draped across velvet sofas scrolling through their phones. My half-sisters were younger than me by 8 and 10 years respectively, products of Robert's second marriage, and recipients of everything he had never given me. They wore designer dresses and designer jewelry and designer attitudes cultivated through years of boarding schools and European vacations, and the bone-deep certainty that the world owed them everything. "Oh my God," Brittany said without looking up from her phone. "Is that the same dress you wore last year?" Tiffany laughed. "I think it is. Maya, sweetie, there are these amazing things called stores. They sell new clothes." I kept my voice neutral. "Nice to see you, too." Brittany finally looked up, her perfectly lined eyes taking in my appearance with undisguised contempt. "Seriously, though, did you not get the memo about the dress code?" Linda said. "Cocktail attire? You look like you are going to a job interview. At a library." They both laughed, and I felt the familiar heat crawling up my neck. I had spent 2 weeks trying to find something appropriate to wear, something that would not draw attention or criticism. Clearly, I had failed. "The dress is fine," I said, more to myself than to them. "How have you been, Tiffany? How is Marcus?" Tiffany's expression shifted to smug satisfaction. "Amazing, actually. We are going to Aspen for New Year's. He rented a private chalet, 5 bedrooms, hot tub, the works. Sounds lovely." "It is. Oh, and did you hear about my promotion? I am now the vice president of client relations at Marcus's firm." Daddy was so proud. He said, "I am finally living up to the Davis name." The words landed like punches, each one precise and calculated. Tiffany was not just sharing good news. She was reminding me of my place in the family hierarchy. She had a rich husband, a fancy title, a father who was proud of her. I had a Honda with a broken heater and a wine bottle that would never be opened. "Congratulations," I said, because what else was there to say? Brittany sat up, suddenly interested. "Oh, and guess what? I got featured in Boston Magazine, the 30 under 30 list. Daddy bought 50 copies. He said he is going to frame one for his office." I did not ask what Brittany had done to earn a spot on the list. Her Instagram following, probably, or the boutique she had opened with Robert's money that sold overpriced candles to bored housewives. It did not matter. In Robert's eyes, Brittany was a success because she was successful at being seen, at performing the role of Davis' daughter with the right clothes and the right connections and the right last name. "That is great," I said. "I am happy for you." Brittany's eyes narrowed. "Are you, though? You always do that thing where you say nice things but you look like you are sucking on a lemon. I am happy for you," I repeated, forcing my face into something resembling a smile. "Really? Whatever." Tiffany went back to her phone. "Dinner is at 7, by the way. Try not to embarrass yourself this time." This time. She was referring to last Christmas, when I had accidentally knocked over a gravy boat and Linda had spent 20 minutes loudly mourning the destruction of her antique tablecloth. Never mind that the tablecloth had been purchased 2 years prior from a catalog. Never mind that Robert himself had spilled red wine on it an hour later and no one had said a word. When I made mistakes, they were catastrophes. When Robert made mistakes, they were charming anecdotes. I excused myself and wandered toward the kitchen, needing a moment alone, a moment to breathe, a moment to remember why I came to these things year after year. The kitchen was a gleaming expanse of marble and stainless steel, empty now, except for the catering staff preparing dinner. I slipped past them through the butler's pantry toward the small alcove near the service entrance where I used to hide as a child when the noise of the parties became too much. The alcove was still there, a small window seat with a view of the back garden invisible from the main rooms. I sat down, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, watching the snowfall in the darkness. "Why do you keep doing this?" I asked myself. "Why do you keep coming back?" I knew the answer, of course. Because somewhere buried beneath 32 years of disappointment and rejection, there was still a small girl who believed that if she just tried hard enough, if she just smiled enough, if she just brought the right wine and wore the right dress and said the right things, her father would finally love her. It was a foolish hope, a childish hope. But I could not seem to let it go. The sound of voices pulled me from my thoughts. Robert and Linda coming from the direction of the kitchen, their words muffled but audible through the thin wall of the alcove. I should have gotten up, should have announced my presence, should have done anything except sit there in the shadows listening to a conversation not meant for my ears. But I did not move. She actually showed up, Linda was saying, her voice dripping with disdain. "I thought the storm would keep her away." "You know, Maya." Robert's laugh was cold. "She never misses a chance to grovel for my approval." I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You should see what she brought, a $40 bottle of wine, like we are running a charity here," Robert snorted. "At least she did not ask for money this month." "Small victories. I do not understand why you even invite her," Linda continued. "She makes everyone uncomfortable. Did you see the way Harrison looked at her dress? He probably thought she was the help. I invite her because appearances matter." Robert's voice dropped lower and I had to strain to hear. "People would talk if I did not invite my own daughter to Christmas. And besides, she is useful. She reminds the girls what they have to lose if they disappoint me. A warning, a cautionary tale. That was what I was to him, not a daughter. A reminder to his real daughters of what happened to people who failed to live up to his expectations." The next words hit me like a blow to the chest. Every time I look at her, Robert said, I see those eyes. Her mother's eyes. Do you know what that is like? Looking into the face of the biggest mistake I ever made every single day of my life? Linda murmured something sympathetic. "I should have done things differently." Robert's voice turned bitter hard. "I should have cut ties back then, sent her away, let some other family deal with her. But no, I had to play the hero, the devoted father raising his daughter alone. And now I am stuck with her, this living, breathing reminder of everything I failed at. I could not breathe, could not move, could not do anything except sit there in the darkness listening to my father describe me like I was a disease he could not shake a stain on his otherwise perfect life." Linda said something I could not quite hear, and then their footsteps faded, moving back toward the main house, back toward the party, back toward the world where I did not belong. I sat in the alcove for a long time, my hands shaking, my stomach churning with something that felt like nausea and grief and a terrible, clarifying anger. All my life I had wondered why Robert could not love me. I had blamed myself. My grades, my career choices, my inability to be the polished, perfect daughter he wanted. I had bent myself into knots trying to earn his approval, trying to understand what I had done wrong, what I could do differently. Now I knew. I had done nothing wrong. The crime was simply existing. The crime was having my mother's eyes being the evidence of a past Robert wanted to forget, a reminder of something he called his biggest mistake. I could not change my eyes. I could not unexist. I could not make myself into someone Robert would love because the person Robert hated was not someone I had chosen to be. It was simply who I was. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. The dining room bell chimed somewhere in the distance, calling everyone to dinner. I could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive fabric as the Davis family assembled to perform their annual Christmas ritual. I walked past the dining room without stopping. I collected my coat from the closet, not bothering to hide the frayed cuffs this time. I stepped out into the storm, letting the cold hit me like a cleansing wave, letting the snow sting my face and melt against my lips. No one called after me. No one even noticed I was gone. I climbed into my Honda, turned the key, and listened to the engine cough to life. The heater was still broken. The windshield was already covered in snow. The gas tank was barely a quarter full, and I had a long drive ahead of me. But for the first time in 32 years, I did not care. I put the car in gear and drove away from the Davis estate, away from the iron gates and the stone lions, away from the Bentleys and the Porsches and the 15-foot Christmas tree. I drove away from my father's cold eyes and my stepmother's cutting remarks and my half-sister's designer cruelty. I drove toward nothing and everything, toward the storm, toward the darkness, toward whatever came next. Behind me, the lights of the mansion grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the snow, and I kept driving. The storm had teeth now. What had been heavy snow when I left the Davis estate had transformed into something vicious, a whiteout that turned Route 9 into a tunnel of swirling chaos. My windshield wipers slapped back and forth in a frantic rhythm, barely keeping up with the accumulation, and the wind buffeted the Honda so hard I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands just to stay in my lane. Not that there was much of a lane left to stay in. The road had disappeared beneath at least 6 inches of fresh powder, and I was navigating more by memory than by sight, following the general impression of where the highway should be based on the snow-covered guardrails that appeared like ghosts in my headlights. I had not seen another car in 20 minutes. The plows had either given up or not yet made it out here, and the only tracks in the snow were my own filling in behind me as quickly as I made them. My fingers were going numb on the steering wheel. The broken heater wheezed out air that was barely warmer than the storm outside, and I could see my breath crystallizing in front of my face. The temperature gauge on my dashboard had stopped working years ago, but I did not need it to tell me that tonight was dangerously cold. The kind of cold that killed people. The kind of cold that made the evening news when they found hikers frozen in their cars or homeless men curled up in doorways. I should pull over, I thought. Find a gas station. Wait out the storm. But every gas station I passed was dark, closed for the holiday, their parking lots empty and unplowed. The few restaurants and motels along the route had their vacancy signs unlit, their windows shuttered against the blizzard. It seemed the entire world had taken shelter somewhere warm and safe, leaving me alone on this frozen highway, with nothing but my broken heater and my father's voice echoing in my head. Her mother's eyes. The biggest mistake I ever made. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, wanting to outrun the words, wanting to put as many miles as possible between myself and the man who had never wanted me. The Honda protested its engine, whining its tires, struggling to find purchase on the icy road. I eased off, reminding myself that dying in a ditch on Christmas Eve would not prove anything to anyone. Robert would probably be relieved. One less reminder of his failures. One less inconvenient daughter cluttering up his perfect life. The thought made me laugh, a bitter sound that fogged the air in front of my face. Merry Christmas, Maya. You finally understand? I was so lost in my own misery that I almost missed it. A flicker of light on the right side of the road, weak and yellow, barely visible through the curtain of snow. I squinted through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then the shape resolved itself out of the white chaos. A car. A big one, old, with squared-off lines that dated it to the late 80s or early 90s. It was pulled over onto the shoulder, half buried in a snowdrift, its hazard lights blinking in that tired, arrhythmic way that meant the battery was dying. The lights barely penetrated the storm, 2 faint orange pulses that looked more like a dying heartbeat than a distress signal. My foot moved toward the brake before my brain had finished processing what I was seeing. Wait, I told myself. Think. Every safety lesson I had ever learned screamed at me to keep driving. A lone woman, a dark road, a stranded vehicle. This was how horror movies started. This was how true crime podcasts found their material. I had no cell service out here, no way to call for help if something went wrong. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to keep driving. To find a gas station with a working phone. To let someone else handle this. But even as I thought it, I was already slowing down, because someone was outside the car. A figure hunched against the wind, struggling with something near the rear wheel. The snow was coming down so hard that I could barely make out the details, just a dark shape moving with painful slowness, the kind of movement that spoke of age and exhaustion and cold that had seeped into the bones. I pulled the Honda to a stop about 20 feet behind the stranded vehicle, leaving my headlights on to illuminate the scene. The other car was a Lincoln Town Car, the old boxy kind that you used to see in funeral processions and government motorcades. Its black paint had faded to a dull charcoal, and there was rust eating at the wheel wells, but even in its diminished state, there was something dignified about it. A car that had once been elegant, now grown old and tired, like its owner. The figure by the rear wheel straightened up as my headlights hit him, raising one hand to shield his eyes from the glare. He was an old man, 80 at least, with a shock of white hair that the wind was whipping into wild configurations. He wore a wool overcoat that looked like it had been expensive once, maybe 30 years ago, and his hands were bare. No gloves. In this weather. His skin was so pale it was almost blue. I sat in my car for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You do not have to do this," part of me whispered. "You do not owe anyone anything. You have already given enough tonight. Let someone else be the hero for once." But another part of me, the part that my father had always called weak, was already reaching for the door handle. Because I knew what it felt like to be stranded and alone. I knew what it felt like to need help and have people drive past without stopping. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be someone else's inconvenience, to wonder if anyone in the world would notice if you simply disappeared. I could not do that to someone else. Not tonight. Not ever. The cold hit me like a wall when I stepped out of the car. The wind tore at my coat, found every gap in my clothing, turned my breath into ice crystals that stung my face. I ducked my head and pushed toward the old man, my boots sinking into snow that was past my ankles. "Sir," I called out, my voice nearly swallowed by the storm. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The old man turned toward me and I saw his face clearly for the first time. It was a kind face, weathered by age, but still strong, with deep-set blue eyes that held a quiet intelligence. He looked at me with an expression of surprise and something else, something I could not quite identify. "My wife," he said, his voice shaking from the cold. "She is in the car. She has a cough and I cannot get the tire changed. The jack keeps slipping." I looked down at the rear wheel and saw the problem immediately. He had gotten the car jacked up, but the angle was wrong, the jack sinking into the soft snow of the shoulder. The spare tire lay in the snow nearby, along with a lug wrench that looked like it weighed more than his frail arms could handle. "Please," I said, gesturing toward the car. "Get back inside with your wife. I can do this." The old man shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. "I cannot ask you to do that. A young woman like you out here in this storm. It is too much. You are not asking. I am offering." I crouched down beside the flat tire, assessing the situation. "And honestly, sir, you are going to get frostbite if you stay out here much longer. Your hands are already blue. Please, get in the car." He hesitated, his pride clearly warring with his common sense. In the end, the cold won. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and shuffled back toward the driver's side door. I watched him go, making sure he made it safely inside, and then I turned my attention to the tire. The first thing I did was kick away the snow around the jack, digging down, until I found solid ground. The shoulder was half-frozen gravel beneath the powder, stable enough to support the weight if I positioned things correctly. I repositioned the jack, cranking it slowly until the car lifted clear of the ground. My hands were already aching from the cold, my fingers clumsy and slow, but I had done this before. I had done this a dozen times on the side of highways and in parking lots, and once in the middle of a thunderstorm in Vermont. When you drive a car as old as mine, you learn to change a tire. You learn to check the oil and jump a dead battery and diagnose the rattling sound that means your alternator is dying. You learn because you have no other choice, because there is no one else to call. The lug nuts were frozen, encrusted with ice and road salt, and they fought me every turn. I threw my whole weight onto the wrench, feeling the cold metal bite into my palms, feeling my shoulders scream in protest. One by one the nuts gave way and I pulled the flat tire free. Inside the car I could see movement. The old woman in the passenger seat, a pale face behind fogged glass, watching me with wide eyes. She pressed her hand against the window, a gesture that might have been gratitude or concern, and I saw her lips move, saying something to her husband, saying something about me. I mounted the spare tire, threading the lug nuts back on, tightening them in the star pattern my high school auto shop teacher had drilled into my head. The snow was coming down harder now, accumulating on my shoulders and in my hair, melting against my scalp and running down my neck in icy rivulets. My fingers had stopped hurting, which was probably a bad sign. 15 minutes after I had pulled over, the job was done. I lowered the jack, kicked the flat tire out of the way, and stood up slowly, my knees protesting after so long crouched in the snow. My whole body was shaking now, deep tremors that I could not control, and my teeth were chattering so hard I could barely think. But the tire was changed. The car was drivable. The old couple would make it home. I walked around to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass. The old man rolled it down, and a wave of warm air hit my face so welcome it almost made me cry. "All done," I said, my voice coming out in shudders. "You should be good to go. But please drive slowly. The roads are terrible." The old man stared at me like I had just performed a miracle. His wife leaned across him, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was beautiful in the way that very old women sometimes are, her features refined by age into something elegant and timeless. Her white hair was swept back in a simple knot, and she wore a pearl necklace that looked old and real. Her eyes were the same blue as her husband's, though hers were watery from the cold she was clearly fighting. "Bless you," she said, and then coughed a deep rattling sound that made me wince. "Bless you, dear girl." I smiled at her, or tried to. My face was too frozen to know for sure. "Do you have far to go?" "Not far," the old man said. "Another 20 minutes if the roads cooperate." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting several bills. "Please, take this. It is the least we can do." I looked at the money in his hand. $100, maybe more. Enough to pay my electric bill for a month. Enough to fix the heater in my car. Enough to buy groceries for weeks. "No," I said. "Please, keep it." The old man frowned, confused. "But you have done us such a service. In this weather, at this hour. You must let us repay you." I shook my head, feeling the ice crystals that had formed in my hair rattle against each other. "Really, sir, I do not need it. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I need you to promise me that you will get home safely, that you will get your wife somewhere warm, and that you will not stop again until you are there. That is all I need." The old woman made a soft sound, something between a laugh and a sob. She reached across her husband and took my frozen hand in both of hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers warm and papery. "You are a good girl," she said, looking into my eyes with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "A good, kind girl. There are not enough of you left in the world." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "Wait," the old man said as I started to pull away. "Please. At least tell us your name, so we can remember who saved us tonight." I almost gave him a fake name. I almost said Jane or Sarah or something anonymous, something forgettable. But something in his eyes stopped me. Something steady and searching, like he was really seeing me, like he actually wanted to know. "Maya," I said. "Maya Davis." The old man went very still. It was only for a second, a heartbeat's worth of pause, so brief I might have imagined it. His blue eyes flickered, and something moved across his face, an expression I could not read. Recognition. Surprise, pain. I did not know. And then it was gone, smoothed away like footprints in fresh snow. "Maya Davis," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. "That is a beautiful name." "Thank you," I said, uncertain why my pulse had suddenly quickened. The old woman tugged on her husband's sleeve, murmuring something about the cold and the hour and the long drive ahead. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on me for a moment longer, that steady, searching gaze that seemed to see right through me. "Thank you, Maya," he said. "I will not forget what you did tonight. I promise you that." There was something in his voice that made the words sound like more than simple gratitude. Something weighty and deliberate, like a vow. But I was too cold and too tired to puzzle over it, so I just nodded and stepped back from the car. "Get home safe," I said. The old man rolled up his window. The Lincoln's engine coughed to life, and the old car pulled slowly back onto the road, its taillights disappearing into the storm until there was nothing left but the darkness and the snow. I stood there for a long moment, watching the place where they had been, my body shaking so hard I could barely stay upright. Then I turned and trudged back to my Honda, climbed inside, and sat there with my hands pressed against the vents, even though the air coming out was barely warm. Something had just happened. I could feel it the way you can feel the static charge in the air before a lightning strike. Something had shifted, some invisible gear had clicked into place, and the universe had tilted slightly on its axis. But I did not know what it was. And I was too tired to wonder. I put the car in gear and drove on into the storm, leaving the shoulder where the old Lincoln had been stranded, leaving the memory of blue eyes and $100 bill. and a beautiful name. The snow continued to fall thick and relentless, but somehow it did not feel as cold anymore. Something had shifted in the night, though I could not say what. The old man's eyes stayed with me as I drove that searching gaze the way he had paused when I told him my name. Maya Davis. That is a beautiful name. I did not know why those words echoed in my mind, did not know why they felt like more than simple courtesy, but somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the lingering sting of my father's words, I felt something stir. A small, fragile thing, like a seed buried under snow waiting for spring. I drove on through the storm toward home, toward whatever came next. I did not know it then, but my life had just changed forever. 10 days passed, and I almost forgot about the old couple on Route 9. Almost. The memory would surface at odd moments. While I was grading papers at my kitchen table, while I was waiting for the microwave to finish heating my dinner, while I was lying in bed at night staring at the water stain on my ceiling that had been growing slowly larger since October. I would see the old man's blue eyes, feel the old woman's papery grip on my frozen hand, hear the weight in his voice when he said my name. Maya Davis. That is a beautiful name. But life has a way of burying strange moments under the accumulation of ordinary ones, and by the first week of January the encounter had faded to a dim curiosity, a story I might tell someone someday if the subject of Christmas Eve came up. Remember that time I changed a tire for an elderly couple in a blizzard? They tried to give me $100, but I said no. Can you believe it? I could not have known that saying no was the thing that would change everything. The morning of January 4th started like every other morning. I woke up at 6:30, made coffee that was slightly too strong, and ate a bowl of oatmeal while scrolling through the news on my phone. The school district had announced a 2-hour delay due to icy roads, which meant I had time to actually sit down and watch the news instead of rushing out the door with my coat half buttoned and my hair still wet. I turned on the small television that sat on my kitchen counter, the one I had bought at a thrift store for $15, and that only got about 12 channels clearly. The morning news was doing its usual rotation of weather updates and traffic reports and feel-good stories about dogs who had learned to skateboard. And then the anchor's expression changed, shifting from professional cheerfulness to practiced solemnity. "We have some breaking news this morning," she said, shuffling the papers on her desk. Harold Pemberton, the billionaire philanthropist and former political advisor, has passed away at the age of 80. Pemberton, who made his fortune in banking and real estate, was known for his charitable work and his influence in New England politics spanning 5 decades. A photograph appeared on the screen. An old man with white hair and blue eyes, dressed in a simple dark suit, standing in front of a building with his name carved into the stone. I dropped my coffee cup. It shattered against the floor, sending hot liquid splashing across my bare feet, but I barely noticed. I was staring at the screen at the face of the man I had helped on Christmas Eve, the man whose tire I had changed in the middle of a blizzard, the man who had looked at me like he was seeing something more than a stranger. Pemberton passed away peacefully at his home in Wellesley on January 2nd, the anchor continued. He is survived by his wife Eleanor and leaves behind a legacy of philanthropy that includes hospitals, libraries, and educational foundations across New England. He was 80 years old. The screen cut to footage of a sprawling estate, gates closed, black cars lined up in the driveway. Then more footage older showing Harold Pemberton shaking hands with presidents and governors and business leaders, always with that same quiet dignity, that same searching gaze. I stood in my kitchen with coffee pooling around my feet and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Harold Pemberton. Billionaire, philanthropist, political advisor. The old man with the broken-down Lincoln and the blue hands and the $100 bill he had tried to give me for changing his tire. They were the same person. I did not have time to process this information because my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I had not seen in 10 days, a number I had hoped to never see again. I stared at it for 3 rings, 4, 5, and then I answered because some habits are too deeply ingrained to break. "Hello, Maya." Robert's voice was strange, tight and breathless, almost manic. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you listening? I am listening. You need to come to the law offices of Sterling and Associates, downtown Boston. Do you know where that is?" "I know where it is." Sterling and Associates was one of the most prestigious law firms in the city, the kind of place that handled estates and trusts for families whose names appeared on buildings and university wings. "Why, there is a will reading," Robert said. "Harold Pemberton's will. And you need to be there. I do not understand." "Why would I need to be at Harold Pemberton's will reading?" Robert made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it did not sound like any laugh I had ever heard from him. "Just be there. 2:00. Do not be late." He hung up before I could ask any more questions. I stood there with the phone pressed against my ear, listening to dead air, trying to understand what had just happened. Harold Pemberton's will reading. Why would Robert know about that? Why would I be invited? What possible connection could there be between my father and a man I had only met once on a dark road in the middle of a snowstorm? Unless the thought surfaced slowly like something rising from deep water. Unless the connection was not through me at all. I thought about Robert's voice on the phone, the excitement barely contained beneath the surface. The way he had said Harold Pemberton's name with a familiarity that suggested more than casual acquaintance. The way he had demanded I be there as if my presence was somehow important to whatever was about to happen. I thought about the Christmas Eve conversation I had overheard. Robert talking about his failures. Robert talking about mistakes. Robert talking about things he wished he had done differently. And I thought about Harold Pemberton, 80 years old with blue eyes and a searching gaze, pausing when I told him my name. Maya Davis. Something cold settled in my stomach. Not dread exactly. More like the feeling you get when you realize the ground beneath your feet is not as solid as you thought. I cleaned up the coffee. I got dressed. I drove to Boston. The offices of Sterling and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a historic building on State Street, all dark wood paneling and brass fixtures, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that whispered of old money and older secrets. The receptionist took my name with a polite smile and directed me to a conference room on the 22nd floor, where she said the other parties were already gathered. Other parties. As if this were a business meeting and not a will reading for a man I had helped on the side of the road 10 days ago. The elevator was paneled in mahogany with a brass railing and a small bench upholstered in leather. I rode up alone, watching the numbers climb, trying to slow my racing heart. Whatever was about to happen, whatever connection existed between Robert and Harold Pemberton, I would find out soon enough. There was no point in speculating. But I could not stop speculating. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway carpeted in deep burgundy, lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men in old-fashioned suits. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors stood open, revealing a conference room that looked like something out of a period drama. A massive table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the harbor, gray and choppy under the January sky. Robert was already there. He sat at the far end of the table, wearing his most expensive suit, his silver hair slicked back, his hands folded in front of him with studied casualness. But his eyes gave him away. They were bright and feverish, darting around the room like a predator scenting prey. When he saw me, he gestured impatiently toward an empty chair. "Sit down. They are about to start." I sat, leaving several chairs between us. The room held perhaps a dozen people, most of whom I did not recognize. Lawyers, probably based on their dark suits and leather briefcases. A few older men and women who might have been board members or trustees. And at the head of the table, a man I assumed was the attorney handling the estate. He was perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing. His nameplate read, Charles Sterling, Senior Partner, and when he spoke, his voice was dry and precise. "Thank you all for coming," he said, opening a folder in front of him. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Harold James Pemberton, deceased January 2nd of this year. I should note that Mr. Pemberton anticipated the need for expedited proceedings and made arrangements with this firm well in advance of his passing. All probate requirements have been satisfied, and the court has granted our petition for accelerated administration given the time-sensitive nature of certain provisions. Before we begin, I want to confirm that all parties named in the will are present." He read off a list of names. Foundation trustees, charitable organizations, a few distant relatives I had never heard of. And then at the end, 2 names that made my heart stop. Robert Allen Davis, he said, and Maya Lynn Davis. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Robert, who was smiling now, a tight, triumphant smile that made my skin crawl. "We are both present," Robert said. "We are ready." Sterling nodded and began to read. The will was long and complex, full of legal language and provisions for various trusts and foundations. Most of Harold Pemberton's charitable work would continue through endowments and grants administered by a board of trustees who had been carefully selected years in advance. His art collection would go to the Museum of Fine Arts. His library would go to Harvard. His personal effects would be distributed among various family members and longtime employees. I listened with half an ear, waiting for the part that explained why I was here, why Robert was here, what possible connection existed between us and this man I had only met once. And then Sterling reached the final page, and everything changed. Finally, Sterling said we come to the matter of the primary estate and liquid assets. Mr. Pemberton was quite specific in his instructions, which he updated just 3 days before his passing. Robert leaned forward, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. To Robert, Alan Davis Sterling read, "I leave the enclosed item along with my sincere hope that he will reflect upon its meaning." Sterling reached into the folder and withdrew a small velvet pouch. He slid it across the table toward Robert, who snatched it up with trembling hands. Inside the pouch was a single silver coin, old and tarnished, no larger than a quarter, with markings I could not read from where I sat. Robert stared at it. His face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, then disbelief, then a dawning horror. "What is this?" he whispered. "What the hell is this?" Sterling did not answer. He was already reading the next paragraph. "To Maya Lynn Davis," he said, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. "I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the Pemberton family residence in Wellesley, all liquid assets held in the Pemberton Family Trust, all shares in Pemberton Holdings and its subsidiaries, and all other properties and investments not otherwise specified in this document. The total value of these assets at the time of this writing is approximately $2 billion. The room went silent. I could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything except sit there while the words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my skull like a ball in an empty room. $2 billion. To me. From a man I had met once on the side of the road in a snowstorm. Sterling was still talking, reading additional provisions about trustees and transition periods, and something called a 6-month probationary clause, but I could not hear any of it. There was a roaring in my ears, a white noise that drowned out everything except the sound of my own heartbeat. And then Robert stood up. "No," he said. His voice was quiet at first, almost calm. "No. This is wrong. This is a mistake." Sterling looked up from his papers. "Mr. Davis, I assure you the will is quite clear. I said this is a mistake." Robert's voice was rising now, the calm cracking like ice on a spring pond. "I am his son. Do you understand? I am Harold Pemberton's son. He cannot leave everything to some nobody, some teacher, some woman he met on the street." The room stirred uneasily. The lawyers exchanged glances. I sat frozen in my chair, trying to process what Robert had just said. His son. Robert claimed to be Harold Pemberton's son. Mr. Davis Sterling said, his voice hardening. "I am going to ask you to sit down and compose yourself. Mr. Pemberton was quite clear in his intentions, and the will has been properly executed and witnessed. He was my father." Robert slammed his fist on the table so hard that coffee cups rattled and papers scattered. "He owed me this. He spent 35 years paying me to keep quiet, and now he leaves me a coin. A worthless silver coin." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Robert was Harold Pemberton's son. His secret son kept hidden for decades. The money that had funded Robert's lifestyle, his business ventures, his rise to respectability. It had not come from his own hard work as he always claimed. It had come from Harold. Hush money, blackmail, a fortune built on silence and shame. And now Harold had left everything to me. Why I did not realize I had spoken out loud until Sterling turned toward me. "I beg your pardon?" "Why me?" My voice came out cracked and strange. "I do not understand. I only met him once. Met him. On Christmas Eve. I changed his tire. That is all. Why would he leave me anything?" Sterling's expression softened slightly. Mr. Pemberton left a letter explaining his decision. I am to give it to you privately after the reading, but I can tell you that he was quite certain. He updated his will just days before his death specifically to include you. This is insane, Robert snarled. He was clearly not in his right mind. I am going to contest this. I am going to drag this through every court in the state. That is your right, Sterling said mildly. Though I should warn you that Mr. Pemberton anticipated such a challenge and took steps to ensure the will would withstand scrutiny. His mental competency was evaluated and documented by 3 independent physicians. The witnesses to his final changes include a sitting judge and a former state attorney general. You are, of course, free to pursue legal action, but I would advise you to consider carefully before doing so. Robert's face had gone purple. His hands were shaking. His eyes had taken on a wild, desperate quality that I had never seen before. You, he said, turning toward me. You did this. You manipulated him somehow. You saw a dying old man on the side of the road and you wormed your way into his good graces. I did not, I said, but my voice was too weak, too shocked to carry any conviction. I just changed his tire. I did not know who he was. Liar Robert lunged across the table toward me. Everything happened very fast after that. Sterling pressed a button under the table, doors burst open and security guards flooded into the room. Robert was still reaching for me, his face contorted with rage, his fingers grasping at empty air. The guards grabbed him, wrestled him back, pinned his arms behind him while he thrashed and screamed. She stole it from me, he was shouting. That money is mine. He was my father. My father. Do you hear me? They dragged him toward the door. His feet scraped against the carpet, leaving long marks in the plush fibers. His eyes found mine, and for a moment we stared at each other. Father and daughter, strangers, enemies. You will regret this, he said, his voice dropping to a hiss. I will destroy you. I will take back everything he gave you. This is not over. Do you understand me? This is not over. The door swung shut behind him, cutting off his voice mid-threat. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Sterling gathered his papers, his movements precise and unhurried, as if wealthy clients threatening violence was a regular occurrence in his line of work. Miss Lynn Davis, he said quietly. I think perhaps you and I should speak privately. There is much you need to understand about your inheritance, and about the man who left it to you. I nodded because I could not speak because words had abandoned me entirely. I thought about the old man on Route 9 struggling to change his tire in the freezing cold. I thought about his wife's papery hands and her words. You are a good girl. A good, kind girl. I thought about $100 bill I had refused, and a name spoken with strange weight. Maya Davis. That is a beautiful name. And I thought about Robert being dragged out of the room screaming about betrayal and theft, and fathers who owed him more than a tarnished silver coin. The world had tilted on its axis, and I was falling into something I did not understand. But I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The Pemberton estate was not a house. It was a monument. I stood at the end of the long gravel drive, my Honda idling behind me, and stared at the building that was now impossibly mine. 3 stories of gray stone and white trim with ivy climbing the eastern wall and chimneys rising like sentinels against the January sky. The windows were tall and numerous, catching the weak winter light and throwing it back in cold reflections. The ground stretched in every direction, rolling lawns now covered in snow, ancient oaks standing bare and dignified along the property lines. It looked like a museum. It looked like a mausoleum. It looked like the kind of place where generations of wealthy families had lived and died and been forgotten, leaving nothing behind but portraits on walls and names carved into marble. It did not look like a place where someone like me belonged. Sterling had given me the keys 3 days after the will reading, along with a thick folder of documents I was still working my way through. Deeds and titles and trust agreements and corporate bylaws, pages upon pages of legal language that made my eyes blur and my head ache. He had also given me Harold's letter, the one explaining why he had left everything to a stranger who changed his tire on Christmas Eve. I had not opened it yet. It sat in my bag, sealed in its cream-colored envelope, waiting for me to find the courage to read it. Every time I reached for it, something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or the sense that once I read those words, there would be no going back. No pretending this was all a strange dream. No hoping I might wake up in my apartment with the water-stained ceiling and find that my life had returned to normal. But normal was gone now. Normal had vanished the moment Sterling said my name and the number 2 billion in the same sentence. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the front door. The key felt heavy in my hand, old brass worn smooth by decades of use. The lock clicked open with a sound like a judgment, and the door swung inward to reveal an entrance hall that could have held my entire apartment twice over. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my car, paintings in gilded frames, landscapes and portraits, and one abstract piece that I suspected was famous, though I could not have said why. A sweeping staircase curved upward toward the second floor, its banister gleaming with polish, its carpet a deep burgundy that muffled every sound. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a soft, final click. "Miss Lynn Davis." The voice came from my right. I turned and found a man standing in the doorway of what looked like a study, watching me with an expression I could not read. He was perhaps 35, tall and lean, with dark hair cut short, and eyes the color of expensive coffee. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, a white shirt open at the collar, no tie. His posture was rigid, formal, the kind of controlled stillness that suggested either military training or years of practice hiding what he was really thinking. "I am Julian Crane," he said, crossing the hall toward me. His handshake was brief and impersonal, like a business transaction. "CFO of Pemberton Holdings. Harold asked me to help with the transition." "Maya," I said, though he obviously already knew that. "Thank you. I appreciate it." His eyes moved over my face, assessing, calculating. I had the uncomfortable sense of being measured against some standard I did not know existed. "Let me be direct with you, Miss Lynn Davis." He did not invite me to use his first name, and his tone made it clear the omission was intentional. "I have worked for the Pemberton family for 12 years. I knew Harold better than almost anyone, and I have to tell you honestly that I do not understand why he did what he did." I felt my spine stiffen. "That makes 2 of us." "Perhaps." Julian's expression did not change. "But you have to understand the position this puts me in, puts everyone in. Harold spent 60 years building this company, this legacy. He trusted me to protect it. And now everything he built is in the hands of a woman none of us have ever met. A woman who has no business experience, no financial training, no apparent connection to this family whatsoever." I met his gaze, refusing to look away, even though everything in me wanted to. "I did not ask for this." "No. But you have it. And that means you have a responsibility. To Harold's memory. To the thousands of people who depend on Pemberton Holdings for their livelihoods. To Eleanor, who is watching her husband's life work being handed to a stranger. Eleanor, Harold's wife. The woman with the papery hands and the watery eyes who had called me a good girl in the middle of a snowstorm. I had not thought about what this must be like for her, losing her husband and then watching everything he built go to someone she did not know. "I would like to meet her," I said. "To talk to her. To explain. She is not ready for that." Julian's voice was flat. "She is grieving, and frankly, she does not understand this any more than the rest of us do." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I was just as confused as everyone else, that I had not asked for any of this, that all I had done was change a tire for an old man in the snow. But I could see in Julian's eyes that no explanation would satisfy him. He had already made up his mind about me. "You should know," he said finally, "that the trust contains certain provisions." Harold was a careful man. He did not like to leave things to chance. "What kind of provisions?" "A probationary period." 6 months. During that time you will have access to the estate and a living allowance, but the primary assets will remain under the control of the board. Julian paused, letting the words sink in. "If at the end of that period the board determines that you are not capable of managing the inheritance responsibly, the trust will activate an alternative succession plan." "Meaning what?" "Meaning the assets will be redistributed according to a formula Harold established years ago. Charitable foundations mostly. Some to distant family members. You would receive a settlement. Generous by normal standards, but nothing close to what the will currently specifies. I stared at him, trying to understand what he was telling me. You are saying that I could lose everything. I am saying that Harold gave you an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. Julian turned toward the study door, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Mrs. Patterson is the head housekeeper. She will show you to your rooms and explain how the house operates. Dinner is at 7 if you choose to join the staff. Otherwise, meals can be brought to your suite. Join the staff. As if I were a guest in someone else's home. As if I had not just inherited the entire estate. Julian, I said, and something in my voice made him stop. I know you do not trust me. I know you think I am some kind of opportunist who manipulated a dying man. But I am going to prove you wrong. I am going to figure out why Harold did this, and I am going to honor whatever he wanted from me. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or the faintest glimmer of respect. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. 6 months, he said. That is what you have. He disappeared into the study, and I was left alone in the marble hall, surrounded by wealth I had not earned and expectations I did not understand. Welcome home, I whispered to myself, the words echoing off the walls. The house did not answer. Patterson was a woman of about 60, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that looked like it had never smiled in its life. She led me through the house with brisk efficiency, pointing out rooms and corridors and staircases without ever quite meeting my eyes. This is the morning room. Mrs. Pemberton takes her breakfast here when she is in residence. This is the library. Mr. Pemberton spent most of his evenings here before his illness. This is the gallery. The collection is insured for approximately $40 million. Please do not touch anything. I followed her in silence, trying to absorb the sheer scale of the place. The house had 23 rooms, not counting the servants' quarters or the various closets and storage spaces. It had a ballroom that had not been used in 30 years, a wine cellar that held bottles older than I was, and a garage that contained 7 vehicles, including the old Lincoln town car that I had seen broken down on Route 9. The car looked different now, polished and restored to its former elegance, sitting under a protective cover like a sleeping dragon. I thought about Harold struggling with the tire in the freezing cold, his hands blue, his breath coming in white clouds. I thought about him refusing to give up, refusing to admit defeat, even when everything was against him. Maybe that was what he had seen in me. Maybe that was why he had done this. Or maybe I was just looking for meaning where there was none. Your rooms are in the East Wing, Mrs. Patterson said, leading me up a staircase I had not seen before. The suite has its own bathroom and sitting area. You will find appropriate clothing in the closet. Mr. Pemberton made arrangements. Appropriate clothing? I looked down at my Target dress and my scuffed boots, the best outfit I owned, and felt a flush of embarrassment. He knew I would need new clothes. He had planned for that. Had planned for everything, it seemed, except how to make me feel like I belonged here. Mrs. Patterson stopped in front of a door at the end of a long corridor. She opened it without ceremony, revealing a room that was larger than my entire apartment. If you need anything, she said, there is a bell pull by the bed. Someone will come. Thank you, I said. Mrs. Patterson. Yes. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. What was he like? Harold, I mean. What kind of man was he? For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but something softer than the blank professionalism she had shown me so far. He was a good man, she said quietly. Fair. Generous. He remembered everyone's birthdays and asked about their families. He never raised his voice, not once in the 30 years I worked for him. She paused, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. I do not know why he did what he did, Miss Lynn Davis. But Harold Pemberton never did anything without a reason. Whatever his reason was for choosing you, I hope you prove worthy of it. She turned and walked away before I could respond, her footsteps fading down the corridor until I was alone with my new rooms and my new clothes and the crushing weight of expectations I did not know how to meet. I sat down on the bed, a massive 4-poster thing with silk sheets and more pillows than any human being could possibly need, and stared at the walls. 6 months, Julian had said. 6 months to prove I was capable of managing a fortune I had never asked for. 6 months to convince a household of strangers that I was not a gold digger or a fraud. 6 months to figure out what Harold Pemberton had wanted from me and whether I could give it to him. I thought about calling someone. My friend Sarah, maybe, who would listen and sympathize and tell me everything would be okay. But what would I say? Hey, Sarah, I just inherited $2 billion from a man I met once. How is your week going? There was no one who could understand this. No one who could help me navigate a world I had never been part of and did not want to join. I was alone. And somewhere out there, Robert was planning his revenge. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. I was in the library trying to make sense of a financial report Julian had given me when Sterling called. I wanted you to hear this from me first, he said, his voice grave. Robert Davis has filed a petition in probate court challenging the will on grounds of undue influence. I set down the report. What does that mean? It means he is claiming that Harold was not of sound mind when he made his final changes to the will and that you somehow manipulated him into leaving you his fortune. Sterling paused. He is also demanding DNA testing to establish his claim as Harold's biological son and rightful heir. But he was Harold's son. You said so yourself. Why would he need to prove it? Because the will does not acknowledge him as a son. It leaves him only the coin. Robert needs to establish paternity legally in order to claim standing as a direct heir. If he can prove both that he was Harold's son and that Harold was manipulated or mentally incompetent, he could potentially overturn the entire will. I felt sick. Can he do that? Can he actually win? Sterling's hesitation told me more than his words. It is unlikely, he said, finally. Harold's mental competency was well documented and the witnesses to his will changes are unimpeachable. But probate cases can be unpredictable, especially when large sums of money are involved, and Robert has hired some very expensive lawyers. What happens now? Now we respond to the petition. We gather evidence. We prepare for a court battle that could take months, possibly years. Sterling's voice softened. I am sorry, Maya. I know this is not what you wanted. None of this is what I wanted. I know. But you should also know that Robert has filed a motion for a preliminary injunction freezing a portion of the assets until the case is resolved. If the judge grants it, you will not be able to access the primary accounts or make any major financial decisions without court approval. The walls of the library seem to close in around me. For how long? Until the case is decided. Could be 6 months. Could be longer. I hung up the phone and sat there in the silence surrounded by books I had not read, and wealth I could not touch. Robert was not just trying to take the inheritance away from me. He was trying to trap me. To make sure I could not run, could not hide, could not escape from whatever he was planning. And I had no idea how to stop him. The injunction was granted 2 weeks later. The judge agreed that the questions raised by Robert's petition warranted caution and 40% of the liquid assets were frozen pending resolution of the case. I still had access to the house, the living allowance, and the corporate accounts that required Julian's approval for any major expenditures. But the money that was supposed to be mine, the fortune Harold had left me, was locked away where I could not reach it. Robert must have celebrated when he heard the news. I could imagine him in his study surrounded by his expensive things, drinking champagne and planning his next move. I did not have to imagine for long. The first article appeared 3 days after the injunction. A tabloid with a reputation for scandal and sensationalism, the kind of publication that lived on the misery of public figures and the curiosity of people who wanted to feel better about their own lives. Pemberton Gold Digger Exposed ran the headline above a photograph of me that I did not remember being taken. I was coming out of a grocery store wearing sweatpants and an old jacket, looking exhausted and disheveled. The angle made me look furtive, guilty, like I was hiding something. The article was worse than the photo. Maya Lynn Davis, the mysterious woman who inherited billions from elderly philanthropist Harold Pemberton, has a past she would rather keep hidden, it began. Sources close to the family reveal that Lynn Davis has a history of financial troubles, questionable relationships, and a pattern of targeting wealthy older men. I read it 3 times trying to understand how anyone could print such lies. There were quotes from anonymous sources who claimed to have known me in college describing wild parties and reckless behavior I had never engaged in. There were implications about my relationship with Harold, disgusting suggestions that our single encounter on Route 9 had been something more than a good Samaritan stopping to help a stranded motorist. There were photographs of my apartment building, my car, my old school, all presented as evidence of someone who was desperate to escape poverty by any means necessary. The truth was nowhere in the article. No mention of my master's degree or my years of teaching. No mention of the students whose reading scores I had helped improve. No mention of the life I had built for myself, modest as it was through hard work and determination. Just lies. Carefully crafted, strategically placed lies designed to destroy my reputation before I even had a chance to defend myself. The phone rang. I did not answer it. It rang again and again and again until I finally unplugged it from the wall. My email was worse. Hundreds of messages, most of them hateful. Strangers calling me a whore, a thief, a disgrace. People I had never met telling me I should kill myself, that I deserved to suffer, that they hoped Robert won his case, and left me with nothing. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the Pemberton mansion settling around me like a tomb. This was Robert's doing. I knew it in my bones. The timing was too perfect, the attack too coordinated. He had hired people to dig into my past, to twist everything they found, to create a narrative that would poison the public against me before the case ever went to trial. And it was working. I walked through the house that night, unable to sleep, passing through rooms I had not yet explored. The staff avoided me even more now. I saw them turning away when I entered, heard them whispering in the hallways when they thought I could not hear. Gold digger, fraud, manipulator. The words followed me everywhere, even in this house that was supposed to be mine. I ended up in the kitchen, sitting at a small table in the corner where the servants probably took their meals. The cook had left hours ago, and the room was dark except for the light above the stove. I made myself a cup of tea with shaking hands and tried to remember why I had ever thought I could do this. "You are in over your head," part of me whispered. "Robert is going to destroy you. He has money and lawyers and connections, and all you have is a dead man's letter you have not even read yet." The letter. It was still in my bag, still sealed, still waiting. I took it out and held it in my hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of the paper, the texture of the cream-colored envelope. Harold's handwriting was on the front, my name written in careful, elegant script. Maya Lynn Davis. I opened it. The letter inside was 2 pages handwritten in the same careful script. I read it slowly, my tea growing cold beside me, my heart beating faster with every line. "Dear Maya, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are probably very confused. I owe you an explanation, and I hope what I write here will help you understand why I have done what I have done. I met your mother once a long time ago. Her name was Lily Lynn, and she was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. She worked as a secretary at a law firm my family retained, and I thought about asking her to dinner 100 times, but never found the courage. My son Robert found that courage. He was 27, then hungry and ambitious, nothing like the man I had hoped he would become. He saw Lily and wanted her the way he has always wanted beautiful things. Not to cherish them, to possess them. I did not know until years later what he had done to her. How he had pursued her and seduced her and then abandoned her when she became pregnant. How he had told her to get rid of the baby or lose everything. How she had refused, and how he had kept his word, using every connection he had to make sure she could never find decent work in this city again. Lily raised you alone, Maya. She worked 3 jobs to keep you fed and clothed. She never asked anyone for help, never complained, never let you see how much she was struggling. And when she died, when you were barely old enough to take care of yourself, you kept going, just like she did. I watched you, Maya, for years from a distance. I watched you work your way through college, watched you become a teacher, watched you build a life based on helping others rather than helping yourself. I watched you become the person your mother would have been proud of. And I watched Robert, too. I watched him take my money and use it for nothing but his own vanity. I watched him marry for ambition and raise his daughters to be just like him. I watched him treat you like garbage, like an embarrassment, like the evidence of a crime he had committed and wanted to forget. I should have intervened sooner. I should have claimed you when you were young, given you the life you deserved, protected you from the man who was supposed to be your father. But I was a coward. I was afraid of the scandal, afraid of what it would do to my reputation, afraid of the chaos it would cause in my carefully ordered life. And then Christmas Eve happened. I did not know it was you when you stopped. I did not know you were Lily's daughter until you told me your name. But when I heard those words, when I looked into your eyes and saw Lily looking back at me, I knew that fate had given me one last chance to make things right. You could have kept driving that night. The storm was dangerous, the road was dark, and you had every reason to be afraid. But you stopped anyway. You helped two strangers you had never met, asked for nothing in return, and drove away into the snow like it was nothing. That is who you are, Maya. That is the woman your mother raised, and that is why I am leaving you everything. Not because you deserve it, though you do. Not because Robert does not deserve it, though he does not. But because I believe you will use it the way I never could. To help people. To make things right. To build something that matters. Robert will fight you. He will try to destroy you. He will use every weapon he has, every lie, every manipulation, every trick he has learned in his miserable life. But he has a weakness, Maya. He always has. He is afraid. Afraid of being exposed. Afraid of losing the image he has worked so hard to create. Afraid of you. You are stronger than he is. You always have been. You just have not realized it yet. There is more I need to tell you, things I have left with Julian that will help you understand the full scope of what Robert has done over the years. When you are ready, when you have found your footing, ask Julian about the red ledger. And Maya. One more thing. I am sorry for everything my family has put yours through. For every year you spent wondering why your father did not love you. For every tear your mother cried when no one was watching. I cannot undo the past, but I can give you the future. What you do with it is up to you. With hope and faith. Harold James Pemberton. I read the letter again, and again, and again until the words blurred, and the tears I had been holding back finally broke free. I cried for a long time in that dark kitchen, cried for my mother and for Harold, and for the girl I had been always wondering what was wrong with her, why her father could not love her, why she was never good enough. There was nothing wrong with me. There never had been. The problem had always been Robert. And now, for the first time in my life, I had the power to do something about it. I found the book 3 days after reading Harold's letter. I had been searching the library looking for anything that might tell me more about the man who had changed my life with a single signature. The room was enormous, floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with volumes that ranged from leather-bound first editions to paperback novels with cracked spines. Harold had been a reader, Mrs. Patterson told me. He spent hours in this room every evening working his way through everything from Greek philosophy to modern thrillers. I was not sure what I was looking for. Clues, maybe. Some kind of insight into his mind, his motivations, the reason he had chosen me out of everyone in the world to carry his legacy forward. The letter had explained some of it, but there were still so many questions, so many gaps in the story that I could not fill. The book was on a small table near the window, separate from the others, placed as if someone had been reading it recently and set it down mid-chapter. It was a worn paperback, its cover faded and soft from years of handling. The title was embossed in gold letters that had mostly flaked away, but I could still make out the words. The Little Prince. My heart stopped. I knew this book. Not this specific copy, but the story. My mother had read it to me when I was a child over and over until I had memorized whole passages. It was her favorite, she always said. The story of a pilot stranded in the desert who meets a strange little boy from another planet. A boy who teaches him about love and loss and what really matters in life. I picked up the book with trembling hands and opened it to the first page. There was an inscription inside. Handwriting. I did not recognize at first, cramped and hurried, the kind of writing you produce when your fingers are numb and the light is bad. For Harold and Eleanor, thank you for letting me help. Safe travels. Maya. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was the book I had given Harold on Christmas Eve. The book from my glove compartment, the one I always kept there because my mother had given it to me, and I liked having it close. I had pressed it into his hands along with my thermos and my blanket, telling him to keep it. Telling him it had brought me luck over the years, and maybe it would bring him some too. I had forgotten about it completely. In the chaos of everything that had happened since, I had not even noticed it was missing from my car. But Harold had kept it. He had brought it home with him and placed it here in his library, among all his valuable first editions and rare manuscripts. A battered paperback worth maybe 50 cents at a used bookstore, and he had treated it like a treasure. I flipped through the pages, not sure what I was looking for, and a piece of paper fell out. It was a note written in the same elegant script as my letter. Brief, just a few lines, but the words hit me like a physical blow. Maya, if you have found this, you are ready. The key is in Eleanor's jewelry box. The lock is in Zurich. Ask Julian about the red ledger. He will understand. Trust him. He is one of the good ones. H. I read the note 3 times, committing it to memory, and then I went to find Julian. He was in his office on the 2nd floor, surrounded by monitors and spreadsheets and the constant hum of a business that never stopped running. When I knocked on the door, he looked up with the same guarded expression he always wore around me, the look of a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. Miss Lynn Davis. He did not invite me to sit down. What can I do for you? I handed him the note. He read it once quickly, and then again more slowly. Something shifted in his face. The guardedness cracked just slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. You found it, he said. I wondered how long it would take. You knew about this, Harold told me before he died. He said you would find your way here eventually, that if you were the person he believed you to be, you would not stop looking until you understood everything. Julian set the note down on his desk and looked at me with new eyes. He also told me not to help you until you asked. He wanted to know if you had the initiative to seek out the truth on your own. And now that I am asking, Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and crossed to a small safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. He punched in a code, opened the door, and withdrew a slim manila envelope. Eleanor gave this to me the day after Harold's funeral, he said. He instructed her to wait to see what you would do with the inheritance before deciding whether to share it. She has been watching you, Maya. We all have. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a single brass key, old and heavy, with a number engraved on the bow. That key opens a safety deposit box at Credit Suisse in Zurich, Julian said. Harold maintained it for over 30 years. He never told anyone what was inside, not even Eleanor. But he told me that when the time came when you were ready, I should take you there myself. What is in the box? Julian shook his head. I do not know. But Harold called it his insurance policy. He said it was the only thing keeping Robert Davis from destroying him completely. The pieces clicked together in my mind. The red ledger. The thing Harold had mentioned in his letter. The thing he said would help me understand the full scope of what Robert had done. When can we leave? Julian almost smiled. I have been waiting for you to ask that question for 3 weeks. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Margaret. Please have the Gulfstream prepped and ready for departure within the hour. 2 passengers. Destination Zurich. I blinked. The company jet. The injunction freezes your personal assets, Julian said, hanging up the phone. It says nothing about legitimate business travel on behalf of Pemberton Holdings, and as the new owner of the company, you have every right to conduct business in Switzerland. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something other than fear and confusion. I felt hope. The flight to Zurich took 7 hours. I had never been on a private jet before. I had never been on any kind of international flight before, actually. The closest I had come to leaving the country was a day trip to Montreal during college, and that had involved a cramped bus seat and a ham sandwich from a gas station. This was different. The Gulfstream was like a flying hotel room, all cream leather seats and mahogany accents, and a flight attendant who kept offering me champagne and asking if there was anything I needed. I declined the champagne, but accepted a cup of tea sitting by the window and watching the clouds roll by beneath us like a frozen ocean. Julian sat across from me, his laptop open, working on something I could not see. We had not spoken much since takeoff. The silence was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy, full of everything we were not saying. Finally, somewhere over the Atlantic, I broke it. Why did you stay? Julian looked up from his screen. What do you mean? I mean, you clearly did not trust me when I first arrived. You thought I was a fraud or a gold digger or both. You could have quit. You could have walked away and found a job somewhere else. But you stayed. Why? Julian closed his laptop and set it aside. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something I could not see. "Because Harold asked me to," he said finally. "Before he died, he sat me down and told me everything. About Robert, about your mother, about you. He showed me documents, photographs, things he had been collecting for decades. And then he asked me to stay, to watch over you, to help you if you proved worthy of his trust, and to protect the company if you did not. And what did you conclude?" Julian met my eyes. "I concluded that Harold Pemberton was the wisest man I have ever known. And if he believed in you, then the least I could do was give you a chance." It was not quite an apology, but it was close. I nodded, accepting it for what it was. "Tell me about him," I said. "Harold. What was he really like?" Julian's expression softened. He was brilliant, and stubborn, and deeply, profoundly lonely in ways that most people never saw. He had everything the world says you need to be happy: money, success, respect. But there was always something missing, a sadness he carried with him even on his best days, because of Robert partly. Julian hesitated, but also because of choices he made, things he wished he had done differently. "He talked about your mother sometimes in the last few years. Not directly, but in the way old men talk about regrets, lost opportunities, roads not taken. He loved her," I said. It was not a question. "I think he loved the idea of her, the life he might have had if he had been braver when he was young." Julian paused. "He never stopped watching over you, Maya. He had investigators send him reports every year, photographs, school records, news clippings. He knew about every award you won, every job you took, every struggle you faced. He was proud of you. He told me that once near the end. He said you had become everything he had hoped you would be." My throat tightened. I wished I had known him. Really known him, I mean. Not just as an old man with a flat tire. "He knew you," Julian said quietly. "That was enough for him." We landed in Zurich at 6 a.m. local time, the city still wrapped in pre-dawn darkness. A car was waiting for us on the tarmac, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, and a driver who spoke no English. Julian gave him an address, and we glided through streets that were just beginning to stir with early morning traffic. The Credit Suisse building was exactly what I had expected. Glass and steel and quiet money, the kind of place where people whispered and everyone wore suits that cost more than my car. Julian had called ahead, and we were met in the lobby by a woman in a gray dress who led us through a series of security checkpoints without ever asking for our names. The vault was in the basement behind a door that required 2 keys and a biometric scan to open. The woman led us through rows of numbered boxes, each one the same burnished steel, each one holding secrets I could only imagine. She stopped at box 7412. "Take as long as you need," she said, and left us alone. Julian stepped back, giving me space. "This is yours," he said. "Harold wanted you to see it first." I inserted the key. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was a single item, a leather-bound ledger, old and worn. Its cover dyed a deep crimson that had faded with age. The red ledger. I lifted it out with both hands, feeling the weight of it, the decades of secrets it contained. Then I set it on the table in the center of the room and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was Harold's, neat and precise, the same elegant script I had seen in his letter and his note. The first entry was dated 35 years ago, just a few lines. January 15th, 1990. "Robert Davis came to see me today. He knows about the child. He knows about Lily. He has threatened to go to the press unless I pay him $200,000. I have agreed. God help me, I have agreed." I turned the page. Another entry, another payment, another threat. The ledger was a chronicle of blackmail, 35 years of it meticulously documented. Every demand Robert had made, every payment Harold had authorized, every lie Robert had told to justify taking more and more money from a man he had already betrayed. The amounts were staggering. $200,000 in 1990, $300,000 in 91, $500,000 in 93 when Robert claimed he needed capital for a business venture, $1 million in 97, $2 million in 2002. The numbers climbed and climbed decade after decade until the total was something I could not even comprehend. Julian was reading over my shoulder now, his breath coming faster as he took in what we were seeing. "He bled him dry," Julian said, his voice tight with anger. "For 35 years, he just kept taking and taking." I turned to a section near the middle of the ledger where Harold had pasted in copies of documents. bank statements, photographs, sworn affidavits from witnesses whose names I did not recognize, and there on a page by itself was a photograph of my mother. She was young in the picture, younger than I had ever seen her, maybe 2021. Her hair was long and dark, falling past her shoulders, and she was laughing at something off camera, her face bright with a joy I had rarely seen in my childhood memories of her. Beneath the photograph was a note in Harold's handwriting. Lily Lynn, born 1968, secretary at Morrison & Associates, 1988 to 1989. Relationship with Robert Davis began June 1988. Pregnant by October. Abandoned by Robert in December when she refused to terminate. Fired from her position after Robert threatened the senior partners. Never received a cent of child support. Raised Maya alone on minimum wage jobs until her death in 2008. Never complained, never sought revenge, never stopped loving her daughter. I could not breathe. The pages blurred as tears filled my eyes, and I had to set the ledger down before I damaged it. All those years, I thought. All those years my mother struggled and sacrificed and worked herself to exhaustion, and Robert was living in luxury on money he had extorted from the man whose secret he had used to destroy her. There was more. I wiped my eyes and kept reading because I had to know. I had to see all of it, every ugly truth Robert had buried under his expensive suits, and his perfect family and his lies about being a self-made man. The ledger documented everything. Robert's threats to expose Harold's illegitimate son to the press in 1990, just as Harold was being considered for a major political appointment. Robert's demands for larger payments every time Harold's wealth increased, every time his public profile rose, every time he had something new to lose. Robert's lies to his own family, claiming that the money came from savvy investments and business acumen, when in fact it came from nothing but blackmail and cruelty. And there near the end, entries from the last few years of Harold's life. Robert is getting desperate. His debts are mounting. He has borrowed against everything he owns, and his creditors are circling. He came to me last month demanding $10 million, threatening to destroy everything I have built. I refused. For the first time in 35 years, I refused. He does not know about the ledger. He does not know that I have been documenting everything, saving every piece of evidence, waiting for the day when I could finally end this. That day is coming soon. I can feel it. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Harold's death. I met a girl tonight. A young woman really, though she seemed younger in the snow. She stopped to help us on Route 9, changed our tire in the freezing cold, refused any payment. When I asked her name, she said Maya Davis. My heart nearly stopped. It was her. Lily's daughter, the child Robert threw away like garbage, and she was everything Lily would have wanted her to be. Kind, brave, selfless. I knew then what I had to do. I knew how to end this, how to make things right, how to give Robert exactly what he deserved. The girl will inherit everything. She will have the power to destroy him if she chooses. And Robert will finally understand what it feels like to lose everything to someone he underestimated. I closed the ledger. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking, tremors running through me like aftershocks from an earthquake. Julian stood beside me, his face pale, his usual composure completely gone. He looked like a man who had just watched his understanding of the world crumble to pieces. I did not know he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I knew Robert was not a good man. I knew he had some kind of hold over Harold. But this is who he really is, I said. The words came out flat, empty. My whole life he told everyone my mother was a whore. That she had seduced him, gotten pregnant on purpose, tried to trap him into marriage. He told me I was a mistake, an embarrassment, a reminder of his worst decisions. And the whole time he was the one who... I could not finish the sentence. Julian reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. It was the first time he had ever touched me, and the gesture was awkward, unpracticed, as if he was not sure how to offer comfort but knew he had to try. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I looked down at the red ledger. 35 years of evidence. 35 years of crimes documented in meticulous detail. Enough to destroy Robert completely. Enough to send him to prison. Enough to take away everything he had ever taken from everyone else. I thought about my mother working double shifts just to keep food on the table. I thought about myself as a child wondering why my father did not love me. I thought about Harold living in fear for 3.5 decades, paying and paying and paying for a secret that should never have been shameful in the first place. And I thought about Robert sitting in his mansion, surrounded by his stolen wealth, planning his next attack against me. "He is not my father," I said. Julian waited. He stopped being my father the moment he abandoned my mother. The moment he threatened her, terrorized her, destroyed her life just to protect his ambitions. He was never my father. He was just... I searched for the right word, the word that captured everything I was feeling. He is a tumor, a cancer that has been growing in my life since before I was born. And now I have the tools to cut him out. Julian nodded slowly. The injunction. Will not matter. I picked up the ledger, holding it carefully, reverently. This is not about money anymore. This is about justice. Robert committed crimes, Julian. Extortion, blackmail, maybe fraud depending on how he reported the payments on his taxes. He belongs in prison, and I am going to make sure he gets there. For the first time since I had met him, Julian smiled. It was a small smile, cautious but real. Harold was right about you, he said. You are exactly what this family needed. I looked at him, at this man who had started as my adversary and was slowly becoming something else. An ally. Maybe even a friend. I am not doing this for the Pemberton family, I said. I am doing it for my mother, and for Harold, and for every person Robert has ever hurt with his greed and his cruelty. Julian nodded. Then let us get to work. We spent the next 3 hours in that vault photographing every page of the ledger, creating digital backups that we stored on encrypted drives and uploaded to secure cloud servers in 3 different countries. We documented everything, cross-referenced the dates with public records, identified the banks and accounts where the blackmail payments had been deposited. By the time we emerged into the Zurich morning, the sun was high and bright, reflecting off the lake like scattered diamonds. I stood on the sidewalk outside the bank, the red ledger tucked safely in my bag, and felt something I had not felt in weeks. Peace. Not happiness exactly. There was too much pain, too much loss, too much history to untangle before anything like happiness would be possible. But peace. The quiet certainty that I knew what I had to do and had the means to do it. Robert thought he was fighting a scared little girl who had stumbled into money she did not deserve. He thought he could bully me the way he had bullied my mother, threaten me, the way he had threatened Harold, destroy me the way he had destroyed everyone who stood in his path. He was wrong. I was Lily Lynn's daughter. I was Harold Pemberton's heir. And I was done being afraid. The car was waiting for us at the curb. Julian opened the door for me, a small gesture of respect that would have seemed unthinkable 3 weeks ago. Back to the airport, the driver asked. Yes, Julian said. We are going home. I settled into the leather seat and watched the city slide by outside the window. Beautiful, pristine, orderly. A city built on secrets and silence, on numbered accounts and locked vaults, on the understanding that some things should never be spoken aloud. But I was done with silence. I was done with secrets. I was ready to speak. The message arrived on a Tuesday 3 weeks after Zurich. I was in Harold's study, surrounded by the copies we had made of the red ledger, working with Julian to build a timeline of Robert's crimes. We had already identified 17 separate instances of extortion that could potentially be prosecuted under federal law, along with numerous violations of tax codes and financial regulations. Sterling had recommended a criminal attorney, a woman named Patricia Vance, who had made her career taking down white-collar criminals and who had listened to our evidence with the focused intensity of a predator scenting blood. The case was coming together, slowly, carefully, piece by piece. We were building something that would not just defeat Robert in probate court. We were building something that would destroy him completely. And then my phone buzzed. The number was blocked, but I knew who it was before I even read the words. Maya. I know we have had our differences, but I am asking you as your father to meet with me one last time. There are things I need to say, things I should have said years ago. Please, give me this one chance. St. Michael's Church tomorrow at noon. I will be waiting. I stared at the message for a long time. Julian noticed my silence. What is it, Robert? I turned the phone so he could see the screen. He wants to meet. Julian's expression hardened. It is a trap. He is trying to manipulate you. Probably. I set the phone down on the desk next to a photograph from 1990 showing Robert accepting a check from Harold. But I need to hear what he has to say. Why, Julian's voice was sharper than I had ever heard it. You have the ledger. You have the evidence. You have everything you need to bury him. Why would you give him the chance to get inside your head? Because I need to know if there is anything human left in him. Julian opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He studied my face for a long moment, and whatever he saw there made him nod slowly. I will come with you, he said. I will wait outside. If anything goes wrong, you call me immediately. Nothing is going to go wrong. I looked down at the photograph on the desk, at Robert's smiling face, at the casual cruelty hidden behind his confident grin. I am not the same person I was 3 months ago. He cannot hurt me anymore. I wish I had believed that. St. Michael's Church was a small stone building on the outskirts of Wellesley, the kind of old New England chapel that appeared on postcards and in history books. I had never been there before, but Harold's letter had mentioned it once, saying it was where he and Eleanor had been married 60 years ago, where they had baptized their children, where they had buried the ones who did not survive. It seemed fitting somehow. A place of beginnings and endings, a place where families came to mark the moments that defined them. Julian dropped me off at the gate and parked across the street, his engine running, his phone in his hand. I could feel his eyes on my back as I walked up the path toward the entrance, my boots crunching on gravel that had been cleared of snow but still glistened with morning frost. The church was empty when I stepped inside. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward an altar lit by pale winter light filtering through stained glass windows. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax, and something else, something harder to name. Memory, maybe, or grief. Robert was sitting in the front pew, his head bowed, his hands clasped in front of him as if in prayer. He looked smaller than I remembered. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and stopped at the end of his pew. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge my presence at all. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, head bent, like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. You came, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I was not sure you would. I almost did not. Robert nodded slowly, as if this was the answer he had expected. He shifted on the pew, making room for me, and I hesitated for a long moment before sitting down. Not next to him. At the far end, with a careful distance between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The stained glass windows told stories in fragments of colored light, saints and angels, sinners and saviors, the eternal dance of good and evil that humans had been trying to understand since the beginning of time. I have made mistakes, Robert said. His voice was rough, heavy with something that sounded almost like emotion. Terrible mistakes. Things I can never take back. I waited, saying nothing. Your mother. Robert continued. He was staring at the altar, at the cross that hung above it, his eyes bright with what might have been tears. I loved her, Maya. I know you do not believe that, but I did. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. When I was with her, I felt like I could be someone better than I was. Someone worthy of her. Then why did you leave her? Robert's jaw tightened. Because I was weak. Because I was young and stupid and terrified of what my family would say. He turned to look at me for the first time, and I saw that there were tears on his cheeks. Real tears, wet and glistening, sliding down the weathered lines of his face. My father was a hard man, Maya. He had expectations. Plans for my future that did not include a secretary's daughter with no pedigree, no connections, no money. So you abandoned her. I made a choice. Robert's voice cracked. The wrong choice. I know that now. I have known it for 30 years, but I was too proud to admit it. Too stubborn to face what I had done. I sat there watching him cry and felt something stir in my chest. Something I did not want to feel. Something that whispered maybe, and what if, and could it possibly be true? I tried to be a good father to you, Robert continued. He was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking, his hands trembling where they rested on his knees. I know I failed. I know I said things, did things that hurt you. But you have to understand, Maya. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. I saw the life I threw away, the happiness I destroyed. And I could not bear it. I took my guilt out on you, and that was wrong. That was unforgivable." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, dabbing at his eyes. The gesture was so human, so vulnerable, that I felt my defenses waver. "I am dying," Robert said. The words hit me like cold water. "What cancer?" Robert's voice was steady now, resigned. "The doctors found it 6 months ago. They gave me a year, maybe less." He turned to face me, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Defeat. "That is why I started the lawsuit, Maya. I was not trying to take your inheritance away from you. I was trying to make sure your sisters would be provided for after I am gone. Linda does not know. Tiffany and Brittany do not know. I wanted to protect them from the truth as long as I could. I did not know what to say, did not know what to feel. The man sitting next to me was a monster. I had seen the evidence with my own eyes, read the documentation of 3 decades of cruelty and manipulation. He had blackmailed Harold. He had destroyed my mother. He had spent my entire life making me feel worthless and unwanted. But he was also my father, the only father I had ever known, and he was telling me he was dying. Maya. Robert reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm, gentle, nothing like the hard, demanding grip I remembered from childhood. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know I have done terrible things, but I am asking you as a dying man to give me a chance to make things right. How? I whispered. How could you possibly make any of this right, share the inheritance? Robert's eyes were locked on mine, earnest and pleading. Not all of it. Just enough to take care of your sisters after I am gone. They are innocent in all of this. They should not have to suffer for my sins. I thought about Tiffany and Brittany, the way they had mocked my dress on Christmas Eve, the way they had laughed at my car, my apartment, my life. They had treated me like garbage for as long as I could remember, following their father's example, learning his cruelty the way children learn everything from their parents. But Robert was right about one thing. They were innocent. They had not chosen to be raised by a monster. They had not chosen to be taught that people like me were beneath them. And if Robert really was dying, if this really was his last chance to make peace with his mistakes, could I deny him that I will drop the lawsuit? Robert continued. His voice was soft now, almost tender. I will tell the press that I was wrong about you, that I acted out of grief and confusion. We can start over, Maya. We can be a family again. The family we should have been all along. I looked at him, at the tears drying on his cheeks, at the handkerchief clutched in his fingers, at the picture of a broken old man asking for forgiveness he did not deserve. And I almost said yes. I almost believed him. The word was forming on my lips, the beginning of a surrender I would spend the rest of my life regretting, when the light from the stained glass window caught something on Robert's wrist. A watch. I knew that watch. I had seen it in the red ledger in a photograph from 2015. Harold's notes had been meticulous. A Patek Philippe Grand Complications. Purchased by Robert Davis on March 15th using funds transferred from account number 77492. Total cost $473,000. Source of funds. Extortion payment, number 112. Robert was wearing a watch that cost nearly $500,000. A watch he had bought with money he had stolen from a man he had terrorized for 35 years. And he was sitting here in a church, crying about being a dying man who just wanted to make things right. The almost died in my throat. The sympathy evaporated. The warmth I had felt the brief terrible moment when I had considered giving him what he wanted turned to ice in my chest. He was lying. Everything he had said, every tear he had shed, every word of apology and regret, it was all a performance. A manipulation designed to exploit the one weakness he knew I had. I wanted to believe in redemption. I wanted to believe that people could change. I wanted to believe that somewhere buried beneath all his cruelty, there was a father who loved me. And Robert knew that. He was using it against me the way he had used everything against everyone his entire life. No. The word came out quiet, calm, final. Robert blinked, his performance faltering for just a moment. What I said, no. I stood up, pulling my hand free from his grip. He stared up at me, and I watched his face cycle through expressions. Confusion. Disbelief. And then, like a mask being torn away, something cold and hard and utterly devoid of the warmth he had been pretending to feel. You are making a mistake, he said. His voice had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. I am offering you a chance to end this peacefully. You should take it. I looked down at him, at the man who had abandoned my mother, at the man who had spent 35 years blackmailing the only person who had ever tried to help her, at the man who had taught me to hate myself before I was old enough to understand what hate meant. I know what you did, I said. I know about the payments. I know about the threats. I know about everything you have been doing to Harold for the past 3 decades. Robert went very still. I found the red ledger, I continued. I have copies of every entry, every bank transfer, every piece of evidence Harold collected over 35 years. I know that my mother was not a whore. I know that you destroyed her life because she would not abort me. And I know that every dollar you have, every business you own, every piece of property in your name was built on money you stole through blackmail and extortion. Robert's face had gone pale. His hands, still holding the handkerchief, had clenched into fists. You have nothing, he said, but his voice was thin now, uncertain. Whatever you think you found, it does not prove anything. It is just the ramblings of a senile old man trying to justify giving his fortune to a stranger. The DNA results came back yesterday, I said. Harold left a sample with his attorneys before he died. Sterling sent it for comparison against the genetic information you submitted with your lawsuit. Robert's face changed again. Fear this time. Real fear, not the manufactured vulnerability he had been performing moments ago. You are Harold's son, I continued. The test confirmed it, which means that everything Harold wrote about you is true. Everything about the blackmail, the threats, the payments. It is all verified now. And I am going to make sure the whole world knows. Robert stood up so fast the pew scraped against the stone floor with a shriek. His face was twisted now, contorted with a rage I had never seen before, a fury that stripped away every pretense of civilization and revealed the predator beneath. You stupid, ungrateful little bitch, he snarled. You think you have won. You think you can destroy me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I just stood there, looking into the face of the man who had haunted my nightmares since childhood, and felt nothing but cold, clear certainty. I already have. Robert's hand shot out and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You want to play games? Fine. Let us play. I will destroy you, Maya. I will burn everything you love to the ground. I will tell every reporter, every journalist, every gossip rag in the country that your mother was a whore who spread her legs for anyone with money. I will tell them you are nothing but a bastard, a gold-digging fraud who manipulated a senile old man out of his fortune. Let go of me. I will make sure you never work again. I will make sure no one ever trusts you, respects you, looks at you as anything other than the worthless piece of trash you really are. By the time I am done with you, you will wish you had never been born. His face was inches from mine now, his breath hot against my skin, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. And then the church door opened, and Julian was there. Robert let go of my arm so fast I stumbled backward. Julian crossed the space between us in 4 long strides, putting himself between me and my father, his body tense and ready. Miss Lynn Davis. Julian said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Is everything all right? Everything is fine. I straightened my coat, willing my hands not to shake. We are done here. Robert was breathing hard, his chest heaving, his face still contorted with rage. But with Julian standing there watching him with those cold, assessing eyes, he did not dare make another move. This is not over, Robert said. His voice was a whisper now, barely audible, but full of venom. You hear me? This is not over. I turned and walked toward the door. I did not look back. I did not need to. Outside, the winter sun was bright and cold, the air crisp with the smell of snow and frozen earth. Julian walked beside me, his hand hovering near my elbow, ready to catch me if I stumbled. "Are you all right?" he asked. "What did he say to you?" I stopped at the gate and took a deep breath, filling my lungs with clean air, trying to wash away the poison Robert had breathed into my face. He threatened me, threatened my mother's memory, said he would destroy me and tell the world I was worthless. Julian's jaw tightened. "We should go to the police. That was assault when he grabbed you. Intimidation. We can add it to the charges." I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until we are ready." "Maya." I looked at him, at this man who had started as my skeptic and become my ally, my friend. Maybe something more, though I was not ready to think about that yet. "He showed me who he really is," I said. "That is what I needed to see. I needed to know beyond any doubt that there is nothing redeemable in him, nothing worth saving, nothing that deserves mercy." Julian studied my face. And now I know. I turned and walked toward the car, my arm aching where Robert's fingers had dug into the flesh, my heart pounding with adrenaline and fear and something else. Resolution. Robert had declared war. He had promised to destroy me, to burn everything I loved, to make me regret ever being born. But he did not know what I had. He did not know about the ledger, the evidence, the 35 years of crimes that were about to come crashing down on his head. He thought he was fighting a scared little girl. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Robert kept his promise. I woke the next morning to my phone buzzing against the nightstand, a relentless vibration that pulled me from a dreamless sleep into a nightmare I could not escape. The clock read 6:14. The sky outside my window was still dark, the January sun not yet risen over the snow-covered grounds of the Pemberton estate. I reached for the phone, my fingers clumsy with sleep, and saw 47 notifications. Text messages, missed calls, emails, social media alerts, all of them urgent. All of them demanding my attention. All of them, I would soon discover, delivering the same devastating news. The first message was from Sterling. "Do not turn on the news. Do not go online. Call me immediately." I did not call him. Instead, driven by the same morbid curiosity that makes people slow down at car accidents, I opened my browser and typed my name into the search bar. The results loaded in less than a second. Pemberton heiress exposed the sordid truth about Maya Lynn Davis, like mother, like daughter, the Gold Digger Gene exclusive video. Lily Lynn's secret life as an escort, witnesses come forward. Maya Lynn Davis targeted wealthy men for years. I clicked on the first link, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The article was long and detailed, filled with photographs I had never seen and quotes from people I had never met. There were pictures of my mother, grainy images that looked like they had been pulled from old cameras or scanned from faded prints. In some of them, she was dressed in revealing clothing posed in suggestive positions, her face unmistakable despite the poor quality. Except, it was not her face. I stared at the images, my stomach churning with horror and disbelief. The proportions were wrong. The body was not hers. Someone had taken photographs of my mother's face and digitally attached them to images of other women, creating a grotesque collage that painted her as something she had never been. Deepfakes. I had read about them, seen news stories about the technology being used to create false videos and images of celebrities and politicians. But I had never imagined anyone would use them against my mother, against a woman who had been dead for almost 2 decades, who had no way to defend herself, who had spent her entire life working honestly just to put food on the table. The article quoted anonymous sources who claimed to have known Lily Lynn in the late 80s, former clients they called themselves, men who said she had sold her body to the highest bidder, that she had targeted wealthy older men with the specific intention of getting pregnant and extracting child support. All lies, every word of it. But the lies were everywhere. I scrolled through page after page of search results, each one more horrifying than the last. The story had spread like wildfire overnight, picked up by tabloids and gossip sites, and even a few mainstream news outlets that should have known better. Social media was flooded with the fake images, with the fabricated testimonies, with a carefully constructed narrative that transformed my mother from a victim into a villain. And it was not just about her. There were articles about me now too. Stories that built on the foundation Robert had laid with his earlier smear campaign, adding new layers of fabrication and innuendo. Former classmates I did not remember claimed I had been a party girl in college, that I had dated older men for money, that I had bragged about finding a rich husband someday. There were photographs that I recognized stolen from my social media accounts, cropped and edited to look incriminating. One image showed me at a restaurant with an older man. The caption claimed he was a married millionaire I had been having an affair with. In reality, it was my thesis advisor, and we had been celebrating the day I turned in my final paper. Another image showed me at a party holding a drink, my eyes half closed. The caption implied I was drunk and out of control. In reality, the photograph had been taken mid-blink at my friend Sarah's birthday dinner, and the drink in my hand was sparkling water. But context did not matter. Truth did not matter. All that mattered was the narrative, and Robert had spent what must have been hundreds of thousands of dollars making sure that narrative reached every corner of the internet. My phone buzzed again. Julian. Board meeting called for 9 a.m. Emergency session. They are talking about removing you. I read the message 3 times before the words sank in. Removing me. From my own company. From the inheritance Harold had left me. From everything I had spent the past 2 months learning to protect. I got dressed in a daze, choosing clothes without thinking, my mind racing through possibilities and finding no escape. The board had the power to do it, I knew. The trust documents gave them authority to act in the company's best interests during my probationary period, and if they determined that my presence was damaging the business, they could trigger the succession clause Julian had warned me about. Robert was not just attacking me. He was attacking Pemberton Holdings. He was using me as a weapon against the company Harold had built, knowing that the board would eventually have to choose between me and their own survival. And when they chose survival, I would lose everything. The boardroom was on the top floor of the Pemberton Holdings headquarters in downtown Boston, a glass-walled space with views of the harbor and a long mahogany table that could seat 20. When I arrived, every seat was taken. I recognized some of the faces. Julian sitting near the far end, his expression grim. Sterling, who had come despite my not returning his call. Eleanor Pemberton, Harold's widow, who I had only seen in photographs until now. She was smaller than I had expected, frail and silver-haired, but her eyes were sharp and clear. The others were strangers, board members, lawyers, people who held my future in their hands and who were looking at me now with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Miss Lynn Davis. The man at the head of the table spoke. His nameplate identified him as Thomas Whitfield, chairman of the board. Thank you for joining us. Please sit down. I took the empty seat across from Julian. His eyes met mine for just a moment, and I saw the apology in them. The warning. This was not going to be good. Whitfield shuffled some papers in front of him, though I suspected he knew their contents by heart. As you are no doubt aware, the company is currently facing a significant public relations crisis. The stories circulating about your family background, combined with the ongoing legal challenge from Robert Davis, have created substantial uncertainty among our investors and partners. I opened my mouth to respond, but Whitfield held up his hand. Please, let me finish. Pemberton Holdings has built its reputation over 6 decades on a foundation of trust and integrity. Harold Pemberton was a man of impeccable character, and the company he created reflected that character. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. The current situation threatens to undo everything he worked for. Those stories are lies, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The photographs are fabricated. The witnesses are paid actors. Robert Davis is behind all of it. We are aware of the allegations, Whitfield said, and we are not unsympathetic to your position. But the damage has already been done. Our stock price dropped 8% in overnight trading. 3 major clients have called to express concern about continuing their relationships with us. One of our largest institutional investors is threatening to divest unless the situation is resolved. So you want me to step down? Whitfield exchanged glances with the other board members. We believe it would be in the best interests of the company if you took a leave of absence while this matter is sorted out. A temporary measure to reassure our stakeholders that we take these allegations seriously. And if I refuse, then we may be forced to invoke the succession clause in the trust. Whitfield's voice was not unkind, but it was firm. Miss Lynn Davis, please understand. This is not personal. We are simply trying to protect the company Harold spent his life building. I looked around the table, at the faces watching me with varying degrees of sympathy and calculation, at Sterling, who could not quite meet my eyes, at Eleanor, whose expression was unreadable, and at Julian, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had gone white. "May I have a moment to confer with my advisors?" Whitfield nodded. "Of course. We will take a 15-minute recess." The boardroom emptied slowly, leaving me alone with Julian and Sterling. As soon as the door closed, Julian was on his feet. "This is a coup," he said. "Robert got to them. He must have. Some of these board members have been in his pocket for years." "Julian," Sterling's voice was weary, "that is a serious accusation. It is the truth." Julian began pacing, his agitation visible in every line of his body. "Whitfield's construction company does business with Davis Holdings. And Martin Chen, the one sitting by the window. His daughter is married to one of Robert's golf buddies. They are not acting in the company's interests. They are acting in Robert's." "Even if that is true," Sterling said, "what can we do about it? They have the votes. If Maya refuses to step down, they will remove her. Let them try." Julian stopped pacing and turned to face me. "We have the ledger. We can release it. Once the world sees what Robert really is, once they understand the truth about the blackmail and the extortion, no one will believe his lies about Maya or her mother. And if we release it now while the injunction is still in place, we could compromise the entire criminal case." Sterling shook his head. "Patricia Vance was very clear about that. We need to let her build the prosecution's case properly. If we go public too soon, Robert's lawyers will argue we contaminated the jury pool. So we just let them destroy her. No one is destroying anyone." I stood up, surprised by the calm in my own voice. "I need time to think, to figure out our options. Julian, can you get me copies of the board's voting records? I want to know who we can trust and who we cannot." Julian nodded. "I will have them to you by tonight." I turned to Sterling. "And I need you to reach out to Patricia Vance. Ask her how quickly she can move. I know she wanted more time to prepare, but we may not have that luxury anymore. I will call her as soon as we are done here." I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders, preparing to walk back into that boardroom and face the people who wanted to take everything from me. And that was when Julian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. "Hello?" I watched his face as he listened, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked terrifyingly like fear. "There must be some mistake," he said into the phone. "I do not... No, I understand. Yes, I will be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at the phone as if it had betrayed him. "Julian," my voice came out sharp. "What is wrong?" "That was the police." He looked up at me, and I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Helplessness. "Someone called in an anonymous tip this morning. They found cocaine in my car, a significant quantity apparently. They want me to come to the station for questioning." The words did not make sense. Julian did not use drugs. I knew that the way I knew my own name. He was meticulous, disciplined, the kind of person who did not even take aspirin unless absolutely necessary. "That is impossible," I said. "I know." Julian's voice was hollow. "But the drugs were there. In my glove compartment. Planted, obviously." "But proving that is going to take time," Robert Sterling said. It had to be Robert. Of course it was Robert. Julian ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I had never seen from him. "He is separating us. Taking out anyone who might help Maya fight back. First, the board, now me." "What happens now?" "I have to go," Julian said. "If I do not show up voluntarily, they will issue a warrant." He crossed the room and took my hands in his. "Maya, listen to me. Do not give up. Do not let them push you out. We have worked too hard, come too far to let Robert win now. But I will be alone." The words came out before I could stop them. "If you are gone, if the board turns against me, I will have no one. You have yourself." Julian squeezed my hands, his grip warm and strong. "And you are stronger than you know. Harold saw it. I see it. Now you need to see it too." He let go and walked toward the door. "Julian." He stopped, looking back. I did not have words for what I was feeling. The gratitude, the fear, the terrible certainty that everything was falling apart around me. "Be careful," I said. It was not enough. It was nowhere near enough. But it was all I had. He nodded once, and then he was gone. I walked back into the boardroom alone. The board voted to place me on administrative leave pending resolution of the current crisis. It was not a removal technically, but it amounted to the same thing. I would have no authority over company decisions, no access to corporate resources, no ability to fight back against Robert's attacks using the weapons Harold had left me. I signed the papers Sterling put in front of me. I sat through the rest of the meeting in a daze, hearing the words but not processing them. When it was over, I walked out of the building and stood on the sidewalk surrounded by the bustle of a city that did not know or care that my world was ending. My phone was still buzzing with notifications, more articles, more accusations, more lies piling on top of lies until the truth was buried so deep I was not sure it would ever see daylight again. I called Julian's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called Sterling. He was in another meeting, his assistant said. He would call me back. I called Patricia Vance. Her office said she was reviewing the case files and would be in touch within 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 days. An eternity when Robert was working around the clock to destroy everything I had. I walked to my car parked in a garage 3 blocks away and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. The gray concrete walls pressed in around me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat slow and steady despite the chaos in my mind. Robert had won. Not completely. Not yet. But he was winning and I had nothing left to fight back with. Julian was gone. The board had turned against me. The world believed I was a gold digger and my mother was a whore. Every weapon I thought I had the ledger. The evidence the criminal case was locked away behind legal procedures and proper channels while Robert operated with no rules at all. I thought about what Julian had said. You are stronger than you know. But I did not feel strong. I felt broken. Exhausted. Hollowed out by months of fighting a war I had never asked for against an enemy who had been preparing for this battle my entire life. I thought about giving up. For just a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to surrender. To sign whatever papers Robert wanted, to give away the fortune I had never wanted in the first place, to disappear into anonymity and let him have his victory. It would be so easy, so simple, so peaceful. And then I thought about my mother, about her hands rough and calloused from years of hard work, about her smile tired but real when she came home from her 3rd job of the day, about the way she used to read me stories at night, making voices for all the characters, laughing at the funny parts, even though she must have been exhausted. She never gave up, not once, not when Robert abandoned her, not when the world turned against her, not when every door closed and every path forward seemed impossible. She kept going. For me. Because she loved me. Because she believed I was worth fighting for. How could I do any less? I started the car and drove back to the Pemberton estate. The house was quiet when I arrived, Mrs. Patterson and the rest of the staff carefully avoiding me, unsure whether I was still their employer or just another scandal waiting to be swept under the rug. I walked through the empty halls, past the paintings and the antiques, and all the expensive things that suddenly felt like props in a play I had never auditioned for. I climbed the stairs to my suite and sat down on the bed where I had spent so many sleepless nights trying to understand why Harold had chosen me. And I cried. For my mother. For Harold. For Julian, who was sitting in a police station answering questions about drugs someone had planted in his car. For myself alone in a mansion that felt more like a prison than a home. I cried until there were no tears left. Until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw. Until the sun set outside my window and the darkness crept in like an old friend. And then, when the crying was done, I stood up and walked to the window. The stars were coming out. Faint pinpricks of light scattered across the January sky, the same stars my mother used to point out to me when I was a child. Make a wish, she would say. Any wish you want. I never told her what I wished for. But it was always the same thing. I wished for strength. The strength to keep going when everything fell apart. The strength to face whatever came next without breaking. Maybe some wishes do come true, just not in the way we expect. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to a number I had not used in weeks. Eleanor, this is Maya. I know you have no reason to trust me. but I need your help. Please." The response came 3 minutes later. "Come to the garden house tomorrow at dawn. We will talk." I put the phone down and stood there in the darkness looking out at the stars. I was not giving up. Not yet. Not ever. Robert had taken everything from me. My reputation, my allies, my hope. But he had not taken my will to fight, and that I was beginning to understand was the only thing that really mattered. The meeting with Eleanor never happened. I woke before dawn, dressed in the darkness, and made my way through the silent house toward the garden cottage where Harold's widow had agreed to meet me. But when I arrived, the cottage was empty. Cold and dark, its windows shuttered against the January wind. There was a note pinned to the door. "I am sorry. I cannot help you. Please do not contact me again. E." I stood there for a long time holding that note, feeling the last ember of hope guttering in my chest. Eleanor had been my final card. The one person who might have been able to sway the board to speak on my behalf, to tell them that Harold had known what he was doing when he chose me. And she had abandoned me too. I walked back to the main house in a daze. The staff was beginning to stir, lights flickering on in the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifting through the halls. But no one spoke to me. No one even looked at me. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting rooms that no longer felt like mine. My phone buzzed. Another notification. Another article. Another nail in my coffin. Pemberton heiress placed on leave as scandal grows. The story was everywhere now. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every conversation in every coffee shop and office building and living room in New England. I was the gold digger who had stolen a dying man's fortune. My mother was the whore who had taught me everything I knew. We were villains in a story Robert had written, and no one was interested in hearing the truth. I needed to get out. I grabbed my coat and my keys and slipped out the back entrance, avoiding the main gate where I knew reporters would be waiting. There was a service road that wound through the woods at the edge of the property, barely visible under the snow, and I followed it until I reached a public road miles from the estate. I drove without thinking, without planning, without any destination in mind except away. Away from the cameras and the questions and the crushing weight of a battle I no longer knew how to fight. I found myself almost an hour later pulling into a cemetery I had not visited in years. Oakwood Memorial Gardens was a modest place, nothing like the grand mausoleums and marble monuments where the Pemberton family rested. The headstones here were simple granite markers arranged in neat rows beneath bare winter trees. The paths were cleared but icy, and the only sound was the wind moving through the branches overhead. I parked near the eastern edge where the older graves gave way to newer ones and walked until I found the stone I was looking for. Lily Lynn, beloved mother, 1968 to 2008. I knelt in the snow before her grave and felt something break inside me. "Mom." The word came out as a whisper carried away by the wind before it could reach anyone's ears. Not that there was anyone to hear it. I was alone here, as alone as I had ever been, surrounded by the dead and the silence and the terrible weight of everything I could not fix. "I am so tired, Mom. I am so tired of fighting." The headstone did not answer. Of course it did not. My mother was gone, had been gone for almost 2 decades now, and no amount of wishing would bring her back. But I talked to her anyway. The way I used to when I was a child, when she was the only person in the world who understood me, the only person who believed I was worth something. I told her about Harold, about the will, about the fortune I had inherited, and the war I was losing. I told her about the red ledger and what Robert had done to her. I told her about the deepfakes and the lies and the way the whole world now believed she was something she had never been. And I told her what I was thinking about doing. "Maybe I should just give it all back," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Maybe that is the only way to make this stop. If I give Robert what he wants, if I walk away and let him have the money, maybe he will leave your memory alone. Maybe he will stop dragging your name through the mud. Maybe you can finally rest in peace. The wind picked up, sending a flurry of snowflakes swirling around me. I pulled my coat tighter, shivering, and stared at the simple words carved into the granite. Beloved mother. That was all she had been to the world. A mother, a nobody, A woman who worked 3 jobs and never complained and died before she was 40, worn out by a life that had never given her a fair chance. She deserved better than this. Better than me kneeling in the snow ready to surrender to the man who had destroyed her. But I did not know what else to do. I closed my eyes and let the cold wash over me, let it numb my fingers and my face and my heart. For a moment, I wanted to lie down in the snow beside my mother's grave and simply disappear. To let the winter take me the way it took everything, eventually burying me under a blanket of white until there was nothing left but silence. And then I remembered Harold. Not the billionaire philanthropist, not the man whose name was carved into buildings and endowed chairs and charitable foundations, just Harold. An 80-year-old man with blue hands and a bad hip struggling to change a tire in the middle of a blizzard. He had been so weak that night. So frail. The jack kept slipping and his fingers were too cold to grip the lug wrench properly, and every movement seemed to cost him more energy than he had to spare. But he had not given up. I remembered the way he had looked when I pulled over when my headlights illuminated his hunched figure in the swirling snow. He had been on his knees beside the car, still trying, still fighting, even though anyone could see he was losing. That was the man who had chosen me. Not because I was special or clever or destined for greatness, but because I had stopped, because I had helped, because in a world full of people who drove past without a second glance, I had been the one who pulled over in the storm. He saw something in me that night, something worth betting $2 billion on, something worth trusting with his legacy. And I was about to prove him wrong. No. I opened my eyes. The word came out stronger this time. Not a whisper. A declaration. No. I am not giving up. I stood up slowly, my knees aching from the cold, my muscles stiff from kneeling so long in the snow. The sun was higher now, pale winter light filtering through the bare branches, turning the cemetery into a study in grays and whites. I looked down at my mother's headstone one last time. I am going to make this right, Mom. I do not know how yet, but I am going to find a way. For you, for Harold, for myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another news alert, another notification about the latest chapter in my public humiliation. But the message was not from a news outlet. It was from Julian. The sight of his name made my heart lurch. He had been in custody for almost 24 hours, now held on suspicion of drug possession, while Robert's lawyers worked to delay his release. I had not heard from him since he walked out of the boardroom, had not known if he was allowed to contact anyone, had not dared to hope. But here he was, somehow against all odds reaching out to me. The message was brief, just 2 sentences. But those 2 sentences changed everything. They are scared of you. Do not stop. Look at page 88 of the ledger. I stared at the screen, reading the words again and again. Page 88. I had been through the red ledger dozens of times since Zurich. Had photographed every page, analyzed every entry, built timelines and cross-references and evidence files that Patricia Vance was using to construct her criminal case. But I had focused on the early years, on the documentation of Robert's blackmail, on the proof that he had been extorting Harold since 1990. I had not paid much attention to the later entries, the ones from the past few years after Harold had stopped paying and started fighting back. Page 88. I ran to my car. The Pemberton estate was 45 minutes away, but I made it in 30, pushing the Honda faster than it had ever gone, ignoring speed limits and traffic lights and the concerned looks from other drivers. I pulled into the service entrance, avoided the reporters still camped at the main gate, and sprinted through the house to my suite. The copies of the ledger were in my safe, along with the photographs and the backup drives and all the other evidence Julian and I had gathered. I punched in the code with trembling fingers, grabbed the binder containing the copied pages, and flipped to number 88. The entry was dated 6 weeks ago, just days before Harold's final changes to his will. Robert Davis has made a critical error. Harold's handwriting was shakier here, the letters more uneven than in earlier entries. He had been dying when he wrote this, his body failing him even as his mind remained sharp. My investigators have discovered that Robert has mortgaged everything. His house, his business, his investments. Every asset he possesses has been pledged as collateral to a private lending institution based in the Cayman Islands. I turned the page, my heart pounding. The institution is called Pacific Maritime Holdings. It is, in fact, a shadow bank, a front for investors who prefer to operate outside traditional financial regulations. Robert borrowed heavily from them 18 months ago to cover losses from several failed business ventures. He has been making interest payments, but the principal remains outstanding. The next page contained photocopies of documents, bank statements, wire transfers, a loan agreement that made my eyes widen. Robert owes Pacific Maritime Holdings approximately $47 million. The loan was originally due 12 months from the signing date, but Robert negotiated an extension in exchange for a higher interest rate and additional collateral. The new due date is February 15th. More importantly, the agreement contains an acceleration clause that allows the lender to demand immediate full repayment upon any material breach of contract terms, including misuse of funds. If Robert cannot pay within 48 hours of such a demand, the lender has the right to immediately seize all pledged collateral without going through standard foreclosure proceedings. I checked the calendar on my phone. Today was February 13th, 2 days. Robert's loan was due in 2 days. I kept reading, turning pages faster now, my mind racing to keep up with what I was seeing. My sources tell me that Robert has been desperately seeking funds to repay the loan. His smear campaign against Maya is not just personal revenge, it is a financial necessity. He believes that if he can force her to settle, if he can extract even a portion of the inheritance through legal pressure or intimidation, he will be able to satisfy his creditors and avoid default. But Robert has miscalculated. He does not know that I have been in contact with Pacific Maritime Holdings. He does not know that one of the principal investors is an old friend of mine who owes me several significant favors. And he does not know that the loan agreement contains a clause allowing the debt to be sold to a third party at any time before the due date. Harold's final entry on page 88 was written in capital letters, underlined twice. If Robert cannot repay the loan by February 15th, he loses everything: his house, his business, his reputation. The institutions he mortgaged will be seized. The life he built on my money will collapse. Maya. If you are reading this, you know what to do. I sat back on my heels. The binder clutched in my hands, my mind spinning with the implications. Robert was broke. All the wealth, all the power, all the expensive suits and luxury cars and sneering condescension. It was a facade. A house of cards built on borrowed money and stolen time. He had spent everything he had on his campaign to destroy me. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of collateral he could scrape together. He had bet it all on breaking me before his loan came due. And he was about to lose. Unless I gave him what he wanted. Unless I surrendered the inheritance, settled the lawsuit, handed over enough money to satisfy his creditors, and save him from the ruin he had brought upon himself. That was why he had been so desperate at the church, why he had resorted to tears and manipulation and finally naked threats. He was not just fighting for money, he was fighting for survival, and I had almost given it to him. I laughed. It started as a chuckle, low and bitter, and grew into something else. Something wild and fierce and full of a dark joy I had never felt before. Robert had spent his entire life taking from others, from Harold, from my mother, from me. He had built his empire on blackmail, and betrayal had destroyed anyone who stood in his way, had never once paid the price for his cruelty. But now, finally, the bill was coming due. And I was going to be the one to collect it. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized but never used. Patricia Vance's office answered on the second ring. "This is Maya Lynn Davis," I said. "I need to speak with Ms. Vance immediately. Tell her I know how to end this. Tell her I need a meeting with Pacific Maritime Holdings. And tell her I need it today." There was a pause, then the sound of typing, then a voice. "Please hold, Miss Lynn Davis. I am transferring you now." 20 minutes later, I had the outline of a plan. 2 hours after that, I had the details. The injunction on my personal assets did not prevent me from accessing the corporate accounts of Pemberton Holdings. Julian had made sure of that before he was arrested, transferring emergency authorization to Sterling in case anything happened. And while the board had placed me on administrative leave, they had not revoked my ownership of the company. I was still the majority shareholder. I still controlled the trust that Harold had established. and I still had access to the resources I needed to make Robert Davis pay for everything he had done. Pacific Maritime Holdings was willing to negotiate. More than willing, actually. They had been nervous about Robert's ability to repay, had been considering their options for weeks. When I offered to buy the debt at face value plus a 10% premium, they practically fell over themselves accepting. The deal was complex. It required lawyers and bankers and wire transfers across multiple jurisdictions. It required Sterling working through the night to draft contracts and Patricia Vance calling in favors from regulatory contacts. And it required one more thing. One more person. I found Eleanor in the garden house at dawn, just as her note had originally suggested. She looked older than she had in photographs, smaller somehow wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. I showed her page 88 of the ledger. I showed her what Robert had done to her husband for 35 years. I showed her the evidence of blackmail and extortion and cruelty that Harold had endured in silence to protect his family's name. When she finished reading, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I was afraid. Afraid that Robert was right about you. Afraid that Harold had lost his mind at the end. But this?" She touched the page with trembling fingers. "This is Harold. Careful, patient, planning everything years in advance. Will you help me?" I asked. Eleanor Pemberton straightened her spine, and for a moment I saw the woman she must have been 60 years ago. Strong, fierce, unbreakable. "Tell me what you need," she said. What I needed was a single phone call. A call to Thomas Whitfield, the board chairman, from the widow of the man who had built Pemberton Holdings from nothing. A call reminding him of debts that could never be repaid, of loyalty that should never be forgotten, of the difference between protecting the company and betraying its founder's memory. Eleanor made that call. But by dawn on February 14th, it was done. I owned Robert Davis's debt. Every penny of the $47 million he owed, every piece of collateral he had pledged, every asset he had mortgaged to fund his war against me. It all belonged to me now. I stood at the window of Harold's study watching the sun rise over the snow-covered grounds and felt something shift inside me. Not joy, exactly. Not triumph. Something colder. Harder. More final. Robert had wanted to destroy me. Had wanted to take everything I had and leave me with nothing but shame and regret. Instead, he had given me the one thing I needed to destroy him. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Julian. I did not know if he would see. It did not know if the police had given him back his belongings yet. But I needed to tell someone. I needed to share this moment with the one person who had believed in me when everyone else had given up. I found page 88. I understand now. Thank you. I hit send. Then I picked up the phone again and dialed Robert's number. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep and something else. Fear, maybe. The fear of a man who knows his time is running out. Maya. His voice sharpened. What the hell do you want? I smiled into the phone. It was not a kind smile. Hello, Dad. I think we need to talk about your financial situation. Silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. What do you know about my financial situation? I know everything. I let that sink in for a moment. I know about Pacific Maritime Holdings. I know about the loan. I know about the collateral you pledged and the deadline you are facing. You are bluffing. Am I? I turned away from the window. As of 6 o'clock this morning, I am the new owner of your debt. All $47 million of it. Which means that in approximately 36 hours when that loan comes due and you cannot pay, I will be the one seizing your assets. You cannot do that. Robert's voice was rising, cracking. That is not legal. I will sue you. You will do nothing. My voice was calm, cold. The voice of a woman who had finally stopped being afraid. Because here is what is going to happen. You are going to drop your lawsuit. You are going to issue a public statement admitting that you lied about me and my mother. And you are going to cooperate fully with the criminal investigation into your 35 years of extorting Harold Pemberton. Robert laughed. It was an ugly sound, desperate and wild. And if I refuse, then I foreclose on everything you own. Your house, your business, your cars, your art, your wine collection, everything. I paused to let the weight of the words sink in. I will take it all, Robert. Every single thing you stole and schemed and blackmailed your way into having. And when I am done, you will have nothing. Nothing except the knowledge that the daughter you threw away, the daughter you spent 32 years treating like garbage, is the one who finally brought you down. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment. Then Robert spoke, and his voice was different now. Smaller, older, almost broken. You would not do that, he said. You are not capable of it. I smiled again. Try me. I hung up the phone and stood there in the dawn light, surrounded by the books and papers and photographs of a dead man who had believed in me. You were right, Harold, I whispered to the empty room. I am exactly what this family needed. Then I went to prepare for war. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning on February 15th. I had chosen the date deliberately. The same day, Robert's loan came due. The same day his entire house of cards would collapse if he could not find the money to satisfy his creditors. I wanted him desperate. I wanted him cornered. I wanted him to walk into that boardroom believing he still had a chance to win, only to discover that the game had been over for days. The Pemberton Holdings Conference Center occupied the entire top floor of our downtown headquarters, a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Boston Harbor. It could seat 300 people, and today, every seat was filled. Board members, institutional investors, financial analysts, reporters who had been granted access to what was being billed as a pivotal moment in the company's history. They were all there to witness my destruction. Or so they thought. I waited in a small office down the hall, watching the proceedings on a closed-circuit monitor. Sterling stood beside me, his face calm but his fingers drumming nervously against his briefcase. Behind us near the door stood Captain Marcus Webb of the Massachusetts State Police, along with 2 uniformed officers who had been briefed on their role in today's events. Julian was there too. He had been released from custody the previous evening, all charges dropped after a forensic examination of his vehicle revealed that the drugs had been planted by someone who had accessed his car while it was parked in a public garage. The surveillance footage showed a man in a baseball cap and dark jacket, his face obscured, but the timestamp corresponded exactly with a meeting Robert had scheduled across the street. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough to clear Julian's name, and it was another piece of the puzzle that Patricia Vance was assembling for her criminal case. On the monitor, Thomas Whitfield called the meeting to order. He looked uncomfortable, his usual confidence replaced by a tightness around his eyes that suggested he knew something was about to happen. He had been one of Eleanor's calls the night before, and while he had not been told the details, he had been warned to expect the unexpected. We will begin with a review of the current situation, Whitfield said, his voice amplified by the conference room's sound system. As you are all aware, the company has been facing significant challenges in recent weeks. The allegations against our primary shareholder, Miss Maya Lynn Davis, have created uncertainty in the market and among our partners. I watched the faces in the crowd. Skepticism, concern, a few openly hostile glances toward the empty chair at the head of the table where I was supposed to be sitting. They still thought I was the enemy. They still believed the lies Robert had spread. They still saw me as the gold digger who had stolen Harold Pemberton's fortune and was dragging his company down with her. That was about to change. Movement on the monitor caught my attention. Near the back of the room, the main doors were swinging open. Robert walked in like he owned the place. He was dressed in his finest suit, a charcoal 3-piece that probably cost more than most people's cars. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture confident, his expression one of grave concern. Behind him came a woman I recognized as his attorney, a shark named Victoria Chase, who had built her career defending wealthy men from the consequences of their actions. I demand to address this meeting, Robert announced, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd, as a matter of urgent concern for the welfare of this company and its shareholders. Whitfield frowned. Mr. Davis, you are not on the agenda. And given the ongoing litigation between yourself and Miss Lynn Davis, I do not think it would be appropriate for you to— Miss Lynn Davis is not here. Robert strode toward the front of the room, his attorney following close behind. She has not been seen in public for 3 days. My sources tell me she has been experiencing a psychological crisis brought on by the stress of the accusations against her. The room stirred. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "I have here," Robert continued, producing a document from his jacket pocket, "a petition for emergency guardianship. Given Miss Lynn Davis's apparent mental instability and her absence from these proceedings, I am requesting that the board grant me temporary authority to vote her shares and manage her interests until such time as she is able to resume her responsibilities." He was good. I had to give him that. Even now, even with everything crumbling around him, he was still fighting, still scheming, still trying to find a way to turn disaster into victory. But he had made one critical mistake. He had assumed I would not show up. Now I said to Sterling. He nodded and opened the door. I walked down the corridor toward the conference room, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each step. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A black Armani suit that Julian had helped me select, tailored to fit perfectly, projecting an image of power and control. My hair was pulled back in a sleek knot. My makeup was minimal but flawless. The pearl earrings in my ears had belonged to Eleanor, a gift she had pressed into my hands that morning along with a whispered blessing. The conference room doors swung open at my approach. Every head in the room turned. Robert froze mid-sentence, his face going pale as he watched me walk toward him. Behind me came Sterling, his briefcase in hand, and Captain Webb in his dress uniform, the gold badge on his chest, catching the light from the windows. "I apologize for my tardiness," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I had some urgent business to attend to this morning." I walked past Robert without looking at him and took my seat at the head of the table. Sterling sat to my right. Captain Webb remained standing near the door, his officers flanking him. "Maya." Robert's voice was strained. "What is the meaning of this? Who is that man?" I folded my hands on the table in front of me and finally met his eyes. "This is Captain Marcus Webb of the Massachusetts State Police. He is here as a courtesy to ensure that today's proceedings remain orderly." I paused, letting the implication sink in. "And to conduct some official business once we have concluded?" Robert's jaw tightened. "I do not know what you think you are doing, but you cannot just— Actually, I can." I turned to address the room at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know there has been a great deal of confusion and concern about recent events. I know that many of you have questions about my fitness to lead this company and my right to the inheritance Harold Pemberton left me. Today, I intend to answer those questions." I nodded to Sterling, who rose and crossed to the audiovisual console built into the wall. A moment later, the large screen at the front of the room flickered to life. The first image showed a document. A debt purchase agreement signed and notarized transferring ownership of a loan from Pacific Maritime Holdings to a company called Lighthouse Capital Partners. 3 days ago, I said I acquired the outstanding debt owed by Robert Davis to a private lending institution based in the Cayman Islands. The total amount of that debt is $47,312,000, secured by the entirety of Mr. Davis's personal and business assets. The room went very still. Robert stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "Lighthouse Capital Partners," I continued, "is a wholly owned subsidiary of Pemberton Holdings, which means that as of this morning I am Robert Davis's primary creditor." "You cannot?" Robert whispered. His voice was barely audible. "This is not— The loan agreement contains a clause requiring full repayment by midnight tonight." I kept my voice calm, steady, almost pleasant. "It also contains provisions for immediate asset seizure in the event of default or material breach of contract, which brings me to my next point." Sterling changed the image on the screen. A new document appeared. Bank statements, wire transfers, a paper trail stretching back 18 months. Mr. Davis funded his recent smear campaign against me and my family using funds borrowed against this loan. I let that sink in. Funds that were supposed to be used for legitimate business purposes according to the terms of the original agreement. This constitutes material breach of contract. Under the acceleration clause in the loan agreement, I have already delivered formal notice demanding immediate repayment. Mr. Davis has failed to cure this breach within the 48-hour window specified in the contract. As a result, I am now exercising my right under the agreement to immediately seize all pledged collateral. This is absurd. Victoria Chase stepped forward, her voice sharp. "My client has done nothing illegal. These are baseless accusations designed to— I have documentation for every claim I have made," I said, cutting her off. "Bank records, wire transfers, testimony from the investigators my client hired to conduct the defamation campaign. All of it has been provided to the state police and to the district attorney's office. Captain Webb stepped forward. The room seemed to hold its breath. But that is not the most serious matter we are here to address today. I nodded to Sterling again. The screen changed. This time the image was a photograph. An old photograph faded and creased, showing a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile. My mother. The real photograph, not the deepfakes Robert had commissioned. Lily Lynn, I said. My mother. For the past several weeks, Mr. Davis has been circulating fabricated images and false testimony designed to portray her as a prostitute and a gold digger. These claims are lies. My mother was a secretary who fell in love with the wrong man and paid for that mistake with her life. Robert found his voice. This is ridiculous. I never... Sterling pressed another button. The room filled with sound. Robert's voice recorded in the church 3 weeks ago, his words captured by the phone I had been holding when he grabbed my arm. You want to play games? Fine. Let us play. I will destroy you, Maya. I will burn everything you love to the ground. I will tell every reporter, every journalist, every gossip rag in the country that your mother was a whore who spread her legs for anyone with money. The recording continued, Robert's threats filling the conference room, his voice growing more vicious with every sentence. I will make sure you never work again. I will make sure no one ever trusts you, respects you, looks at you as anything other than the worthless piece of trash you really are. Sterling stopped the playback. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert stood frozen, his face gray, his hands trembling at his sides. Victoria Chase had taken a step back from him, her expression shifting from professional confidence to barely concealed disgust. But I was not finished. I have additional evidence, I said. Evidence that Robert Davis spent 35 years blackmailing Harold Pemberton, extorting millions of dollars in exchange for keeping the secret of their biological relationship. Evidence of tax fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. All of it has been turned over to the appropriate authorities. Captain Webb stepped forward again, his footsteps loud in the silent room. Robert Allen Davis, he said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority, you are under arrest for extortion, tax evasion, wire fraud, and criminal defamation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Robert's eyes found mine. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something beneath the rage and the fear. Something that might have been recognition. Understanding. The knowledge that he had finally met an opponent he could not bully or buy or break. You cannot do this to me, he said, his voice cracked. I am your father. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back from the table. You were never my father. The words came out quiet, calm, final. A father protects his children. A father loves them, supports them, helps them become the best versions of themselves. You did none of those things. You abandoned my mother when she needed you most. You spent my entire childhood making me feel worthless and unwanted, and when I finally found someone who believed in me, someone who wanted to give me a chance, you tried to destroy that too. I walked toward him, stopping just out of arm's reach. Harold Pemberton was more of a father to me in one night than you were in 32 years. He saw something in me that you were too blind and too selfish to see. And now, because of him, I have the power to do what should have been done decades ago. Robert's face contorted. You ungrateful little... He lunged toward me. The officers moved faster than I could track, intercepting him before he could close the distance. They seized his arms, wrenched them behind his back, and the click of handcuffs echoed through the room like a gunshot. Get your hands off me! Robert was screaming now, all pretense of dignity abandoned. Do you know who I am? I will destroy all of you. I will... The officers dragged him toward the door, his protests fading as they pulled him into the corridor. I watched him go, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a vast, empty relief. It was over. The room erupted. Questions from the shareholders, demands for explanation, reporters shouting into their phones, racing to be the first to break the story. Through it all, I stood at the head of the table, letting the chaos wash over me like a wave breaking against stone. Sterling appeared at my elbow. "Are you all right?" I nodded slowly. "I think so." The board members were approaching now, their expressions a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like respect. Whitfield reached me first, his hand extended. "Miss Lynn Davis," he said, "I owe you an apology. We all do." I shook his hand. "You were trying to protect the company. I understand that. Still." His eyes met mine. "Harold always said you were special." I should have trusted his judgment. I almost laughed. Harold barely knew me. He met me once on the side of a road in the middle of a snowstorm. Sometimes, Whitfield said, that is enough. Movement near the back of the room caught my attention. Linda Davis Roberts' wife was slipping toward the exit, her face pale, her designer dress suddenly looking like a costume she wanted to shed. Behind her, Tiffany and Brittany followed like shadows, their eyes downcast, their usual arrogance replaced by something smaller. Shame, maybe. Or fear. They did not look at me as they passed, did not acknowledge that I existed. They simply vanished into the crowd, distancing themselves from the wreckage of their father's ambitions as quickly as they could. I watched them go, and felt nothing but pity. They had spent their whole lives believing Robert's lies, believing they were better than everyone else because their father had money and power and the willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. And now all of that was gone, swept away in a single morning, leaving them with nothing but the truth. They would survive. People like them always did. They would find new husbands, new protectors, new sources of wealth to attach themselves to. The world was full of men who would overlook their father's crimes in exchange for their beauty and their pedigree. But they would never look at me the same way again. None of them would. Julian found me an hour later after the room had finally emptied and the last of the reporters had been escorted out. He was still wearing the clothes he had been arrested in, rumpled and stained, but his eyes were clear and his smile was warm. "You did it," he said. "We did it." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "I could not have done any of this without you." He squeezed back. "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild." I looked around the empty conference room at the chairs pushed back from the table at the blank screen where Robert's crimes had been displayed for all to see. The company is going to need strong leadership, the board is going to need reassurance, and I am going to need help figuring out how to run a $2 billion empire. Julian smiled. "I know a good CFO. I heard he has a criminal record. Charges were dropped. He is basically a saint." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had managed in weeks. It felt strange in my throat, like a muscle I had forgotten how to use. There will be more challenges ahead. The criminal trial, the civil proceedings, the endless work of untangling Robert's web of lies and rebuilding the reputation he had tried so hard to destroy. But for now, in this moment, I allowed myself to feel something like victory. I had come into this room as the woman Robert Davis had tried to destroy. I was leaving as the woman who had destroyed him instead. The foreclosure took place on a Thursday in late March, when the last of the winter snow had finally melted and the first green shoots were beginning to push through the mud. I stood at the end of the driveway watching as men in dark suits moved through the Davis estate, like ghosts cataloging everything, photographing everything, preparing to strip away the life Robert had built on stolen money and broken promises. The iron gates stood open, the stone lions on their pillars looking somehow diminished, now their carved eyes staring at nothing. It had been 6 weeks since Robert's arrest. 6 weeks of court appearances and legal proceedings and endless negotiations with creditors who had suddenly discovered that the man they had trusted was not who he claimed to be. The criminal trial was still months away, but the civil consequences had already begun. The house, the cars, the art collection and the wine cellar and all the expensive things Robert had accumulated over a lifetime of taking from others. All of it was being seized. I had not planned to come here today, had not wanted to witness this final chapter in person. But something had drawn me back to this place, to the house where I had spent so many miserable holidays, where I had been mocked and dismissed and made to feel like I was worth less than the dirt on their expensive carpets. I needed to see it end. The front door opened and a figure emerged. Linda Davis looked nothing like the woman I remembered from Christmas Eve. Her designer dress had been replaced by simple slacks and a sweater, her perfect hair now limp and unstyled. She had aged a decade in the past 6 weeks, the stress carving deep lines into a face that had once been beautiful. She saw me standing at the end of the driveway and froze. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The stepmother who had treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own father's house, and the stepdaughter she had never bothered to know. Then Linda walked toward me, her step slow and uncertain, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Maya." Her voice was hoarse. "Please, you have to help me." I said nothing. I did not know about any of it. Linda's hands were trembling as she reached toward me. The blackmail, the extortion, none of it. Robert never told me where the money came from. I thought he was successful. I thought he had earned everything we had. I remained silent, watching her waiting. "Please." Linda's voice cracked. "I have nowhere to go. Tiffany and Brittany. They are staying with friends, but no one will take me in. My family disowned me years ago when I married Robert. I have nothing. No money, no job, no skills. I am 58 years old, and I have never worked a day in my life." The irony was not lost on me. This woman who had looked down on my mother for being a secretary, who had sneered at me for being a teacher, was now begging for help from the people she had spent decades despising. I could have turned away. Could have left her standing there in the driveway of the house she was about to lose, let her figure out her own survival the way my mother had been forced to figure out hers. It would have been justice in a way, a fitting punishment for all the years of cruelty and condescension. But I was not Robert. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope I had prepared that morning. "This is enough to cover 1 month's rent at a modest apartment," I said. "There is also information about a job placement center downtown. They help people find employment training programs, that sort of thing." Linda stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "I do not understand," she whispered. "I am not doing this for you." I pressed the envelope into her hands. "I am doing it because my mother would have wanted me to. She believed that everyone deserved a second chance, even people who did not deserve it." Linda's fingers closed around the envelope. Her eyes were wet now, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "Maya, do not thank me." I took a step back, putting distance between us. "And do not contact me again. This is the only help you will receive from me. What you do with it is up to you." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her envelope and her tears and the ruins of the life she had built on my family's suffering. I did not look back. The car was waiting for me at the end of the street. Julian sat in the driver's seat, his window rolled down, watching me approach. "How did it go?" I climbed into the passenger seat and fastened my belt, as well as could be expected. "You gave her the envelope." I did. Julian nodded slowly. He did not ask why. He understood the way he always seemed to understand, that kindness was not the same as weakness, that mercy could be offered without forgetting what had been done, that some doors once closed did not need to be opened again. He started the car and pulled away from the curb, leaving the Davis estate behind us. I watched it shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared around a corner, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly. Not closure either. Just the quiet knowledge that a chapter of my life had ended and a new one was about to begin. "Where to now?" Julian asked. "Home," I said. He smiled. "The Pemberton estate." I shook my head. "No. Home." And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what that word meant. 1 year later, on a crisp December morning, I stood on the steps of a building that had once been a monument to wealth and privilege. The Pemberton estate had been transformed. Gone were the locked gates and the private drive and the sense of exclusion that had hung over the property like a fog. In their place was a wide, welcoming entrance marked by a simple sign in wrought iron letters: the Eleanor Foundation, named for Harold's widow who had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 months after her husband. She had left behind a letter expressing her final wishes: that the estate she had called home for 60 years should be used to help people like Lily Lynn, women who had been abandoned, children who had been discarded, families who had fallen through the cracks of a society that measured worth in dollars and pedigrees. We had honored her wishes. The main house had been converted into offices and meeting rooms staffed by social workers and counselors and job training specialists. The guest houses had been transformed into transitional housing, providing safe shelter for women escaping difficult situations. The gardens had been opened to the public, a peaceful retreat, where anyone could come to walk and think and heal. And at the center of it all, in what had once been Harold's study, was a small museum dedicated to the memory of the woman who had started it all. My mother's photograph hung on the wall, the real photograph showing her as she truly was, a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile full of hope and possibility before Robert Davis had entered her life and stolen everything from her. Beneath the photograph was a simple plaque. Lily Lynn, beloved mother, her kindness lives on. I visited that room often, sometimes to talk to her the way I used to talk to her grave, sometimes just to sit in the silence and remember. She would have loved this place, I thought. Would have loved seeing her struggles transformed into something that could help others. That was her legacy. Not the pain Robert had inflicted on her, not the lies he had spread about her memory, but this, a foundation built on compassion. A future built on hope. The grand opening ceremony had been held that morning, attended by dignitaries and donors, and most importantly, by the first families who would be helped by the Foundation's programs. I had given a speech short and simple explaining why this work mattered and what we hoped to accomplish. And then I had stepped back and let others take the spotlight, because this was not about me. It had never been about me. It was about the women who would find shelter here when they had nowhere else to go. The children who would learn that they were valued and loved no matter where they came from. The futures that would be built from the ashes of the past. Julian found me on the balcony as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, watching the guests mingle in the gardens below. "You did well today," he said, leaning against the railing beside me. The speech was perfect. It was too short. He laughed. "Since when do you think speeches should be longer?" I smiled. "Fair point." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The December air was cold but not bitter. Not like that night a year ago when I had pulled over on Route 9 and changed a tire for two strangers in a blizzard. So much had changed since then. So much had been lost and found and transformed. Robert was in prison now, serving a 12-year sentence for extortion fraud and tax evasion. His appeal had been denied. His assets had been liquidated. The empire he had built on Harold's blackmail money had been dismantled piece by piece, with the proceeds going to his victims and creditors. I had not visited him, had not spoken to him since the day of his arrest. Some people said I was cold for cutting him off so completely. Others said I was right. I did not care either way. Robert Davis had stopped being my father the moment I read Harold's letter. He was nothing to me now, too. A closed chapter. A cautionary tale. Linda had found work at a department store downtown. Not glamorous, but honest. She had not contacted me since that day at the foreclosure, and I had not contacted her. We existed in the same city but in different worlds, and that was how it should be. Tiffany and Brittany had both married within months of their father's arrest, attaching themselves to wealthy men who were willing to overlook the scandal in exchange for their beauty and their names. I wished them well in the abstract way you might wish well to strangers you pass on the street. They were not my family. They never had been. My family was here. Julian standing beside me on this balcony. Eleanor watching over us from wherever she had gone. Harold, whose photograph hung in the entry hall, his blue eyes still holding that same searching gaze. And my mother. Always my mother. Julian shifted beside me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it?" He turned to face me. Any of it, I thought about the question. About the year that had passed and everything it had contained. The fear and the anger and the moments when I had wanted to give up. The late nights and the legal battles and the endless work of building something new from the ruins of something old. "No," I said finally. "I do not. Not even the parts that were hard, especially the parts that were hard." I looked out at the gardens, at the families walking the paths, at the children playing on the lawn. The hard parts taught me who I was. Who I wanted to be. They showed me that I was stronger than I ever imagined. Julian nodded slowly. "Harold would be proud of you. I think he would be proud of all of us." We watched the sun set together, the sky turning gold and pink and purple as the day faded into evening. The guests began to drift toward their cars, heading home to their own lives, carrying with them the hope that the Eleanor Foundation represented. When the last of them had gone, I turned to Julian. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For everything. For believing in me when no one else did. For standing by me when it would have been easier to walk away. For helping me become the person I needed to be." Julian smiled. "That is what partners do." Partners. The word felt right, felt true. I did not know what the future held for us, did not know if we would remain colleagues or become something more. But I knew that whatever happened, we would face it together. That was what mattered. That was what family meant. The night was quiet as I returned to the study that had once belonged to Harold. I sat at his desk, the same desk where he had written the letter that had changed my life, and opened the journal I had started keeping after his death. It had become a habit, this nightly reflection, a way of processing everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. I picked up my pen and began to write. Dear Mom, it has been 1 year since that night on Route 9. 1 year since I changed a tire for 2 strangers and inherited a fortune I never asked for. 1 year since everything I thought I knew about myself and my family was turned upside down. I used to think I understood what family meant. Shared blood, shared history. The people you were stuck with whether you liked them or not. I was wrong. Family is not about DNA. It never was. Family is the people who show up for you when everyone else has left. The ones who stand beside you in the storm when the smart thing would be to run for shelter. The ones who see who you really are, not who the world says you should be, and love you anyway. Harold Pemberton was more of a father to me in one night than Robert Davis was in 32 years. Eleanor treated me with more kindness in our brief time together than Linda ever did. Julian, a man I met as a skeptic and a stranger, has become closer to me than the sisters who share my blood. Family is a choice. The most important choice we ever make. I want you to know that I have made good choices, Mom. I have surrounded myself with people who lift me up instead of tearing me down. I have built something meaningful from the ashes of something terrible. I have learned to love myself the way you always loved me, completely and without reservation. And I have learned something else, too. Something you tried to teach me when I was young, but that I did not understand until now. Kindness is not weakness. In a world full of predators, keeping a warm heart is an act of rebellion. It is easy to become hard and cold and ruthless. Easy to let the cruelty of others transform you into something just as cruel. But staying soft, staying open, staying capable of love and compassion and grace, that takes real courage. That takes strength most people never find. But here is the thing. Kindness without boundaries is just another word for being a doormat. Compassion without wisdom is just another way to get hurt. You were kind, Mom, the kindest person I have ever known. But you were also strong. You raised me alone, worked 3 jobs, built a life from nothing with nothing but your determination and your love. You did not let Robert break you. You did not let the world make you bitter. You were a lion, Mom. A gentle lion who fought for what mattered and let go of what did not. I want to be like you. I want to be the kind of person who helps strangers on dark roads, who shows mercy to people who do not deserve it, who builds instead of destroys. But I also want to be the kind of person who protects herself, who draws lines and holds them, who knows when kindness has reached its limit and justice must take its place. I want to have teeth, Mom, gentle teeth that I only bare when I need to, but teeth nonetheless. The world is full of people like Robert. People who see kindness as weakness, who mistake compassion for an invitation to take advantage. They will try to make you feel small. They will tell you that your heart is a liability, that caring makes you vulnerable, that the only way to survive is to become as cold as they are. Do not believe them. Your kindness is not stupidity. Your compassion is not naivety. Your willingness to see the good in people is not a flaw to be corrected. It is your greatest strength. But use it wisely. Give it to people who deserve it. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Do not waste your warmth on those who will only use it against you. Be a kind lion, not a gentle sheep. And if someone tries to destroy you, If they come for everything you love, with cruelty and lies and malice, do not be afraid to fight back. Do not be afraid to use every weapon at your disposal. Do not be afraid to buy their debt and foreclose on their house. Justice is not cruelty. Consequences are not revenge. And protecting yourself is not the same as becoming what you hate. I learned that this year. I learned it the hard way through pain and fear and moments when I wanted to give up. But I learned it. And now I am passing it on. To whoever reads these words, to whatever daughter or son or struggling soul needs to hear them. You are stronger than you know, you are braver than you feel, and you are worthy of every good thing that comes your way. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. With love. Maya. I set down the pen and looked out the window at the night sky. The stars were out bright and clear, the same stars my mother used to point at when I was young. Make a wish, she would say. Any wish you want. I closed my eyes and made a wish, not for wealth or power or any of the things I had once thought mattered, but for something simpler, something truer. I wished that somewhere out there on a dark road in a cold storm, another kind stranger would pull over to help someone in need. I wished that the kindness would continue, that it would spread, ripple outward, touch lives I would never know. I wished that my mother could see what I had become and that she would be proud. Then I opened my eyes, closed the journal, and walked out into the night. The future was waiting, and I was ready for it.